You arrive at Topkapi just as the Bosphorus remembers how to glitter, and a guide with a lantern you don't really need tilts it toward a wooden door painted the same deep green as sleep. The word harem has probably been taught to you by posters and pulp, all gauzy veils and restless lutes, but the door says something quieter. In Arabic and Ottoman Turkish, the root means protected, inviolable, a place you lower your voice and mind your shoes. You step in, and the palace turns into a neighborhood, a private household folded inside an empire, where mothers and children and teachers and cooks and scribes perform a choreography that prefers ledgers to legends. It isn't a perpetual scandal, it's a long domestic sentence with tidy commas: wake, lessons, prayer, errands, letter writing, embroidery, more lessons, supper, and the soft clatter of bracelets when the day decides to sit down. The air smells faintly of rosewater and warm lime plaster. Lamps blink like tame stars along the corridor called the Golden Road, not because it glows, but because on feast days coins once pattered across its tiles into small hands, an imperial habit somewhere between a tradition and a wink. You walk slower. The building asks you to. The harem is a set of rooms with a memory, the Valide Sultan's suite like a quiet parliament, nurseries where toys were carved from fruit peels to make babies laugh, bath chambers that sound like distant rain. And yes, there is rank, and teaching, and rules posted where only certain eyes may see them. But the bones of it are more familiar than the myths allow. It's family housing, with a staff list that got out of hand. Mainstream fact, folded like a note beneath a cushion, the imperial harem, the harem-I Humayun, grew within Topkapi Palace especially from the 16th century onward, formalized under sultans like Suleiman, organized under the Valide Sultan, the sultan's mother, and protected by a corps of eunuchs who served as administrators and guards. At its busiest, the population could swell into hundreds, novices learning, senior women managing stipends and ceremony, children at their primers, tutors and doctors, laundresses and librarians, cooks and coffee bearers moving on a timetable that could make a monastery jealous. Far from being a carnival without clocks, it was a schedule that happened to wear silk. You listen, and the building answers with little household noises, a copper tray finding a table, a lesson syllable rolling down a hallway, somewhere, a pen scratching a petition in a practiced hand. Courtly training is not gossip, it is repetition. Girls practice entrances and exits as if stage directions were virtues. Bow this far to this person, remain standing for that one, remember whose aunt is also a patron of the fountain you like. Men outside the walls may duel with sabers, inside duels are fought with etiquette. Joke 1. The only blades you see this hour are fruit knives and the fierce edges of perfectly ironed cuffs. You settle on a low cushion and let the room tell you what it is not. It is not a nightclub, not a prison, not a parliament, though it occasionally borrows a task from each. The harem is a human resources department that also hosts lullabies. Staff are recruited, evaluated, promoted, retired, meals are planned, birthdays filed, holy days rehearsed, dowries tallied with thread-wrapped numbers that make accountants smile. If anything is wild here, it is the precision with which boredom is cultivated. People sleep better where routines keep their shape. And routines, done long enough, become culture. You notice how many doors have two stories, the visible one with a carved lintel and the invisible one in people's heads that says, "You belong here, you don't." Access is everything. The Sultan himself is a rumor in these halls as often as he is a presence. Children know his step the way trees know wind. Consorts and tutors turn logistics into a buffer that lets him be father and ruler without tripping over either role. Your shoulders settle. The myth of constant intrigue can't survive the sound of someone reminding a room that lesson hour starts at the second call to prayer. The rooms keep insisting on their workaday dignity. Kitchens groomed for sherbets and soups. Storerooms where fabrics sleep by color like patient rainbows. A small treasury that doesn't glitter so much as per stipends in paper packets, stamped and counted, lists of gifts inbound and gifts outbound, memoranda about whose niece needs a reading tutor and which fountain requires repair before the next procession. The harem is not only an address, it is a budget. Joke 2. When stories promise you endless indulgence, ask to see their receipts. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. While outsiders imagined wine and waste, the harem was busy inventing a bedtime of its own. Story nights where older women taught children epics with gestures and lullabies. Henna evenings where hands were patterned like small maps. Shared reading circles where a girl took her turn sounding out a Persian poem and was gently corrected by an aunt who could quote half the library from memory. The most exotic thing in the room is the patience. Historians still argue whether the so-called Sultanate of women, that stretched from roughly the mid-16th to mid-17th century, describes a genuine constitutional tilt toward female power or simply a season in which particularly capable mothers and consorts, think Harem, Kozum, Turhan, exerted influence through the ordinary levers of patronage and proximity. They also debate whether Western travelers' accounts are more mirror than window, Orientalist fantasies projecting their own anxieties onto rooms they never saw. You don't need a verdict tonight to let the furniture teach you the boring truth. Power here is embroidered, not shouted. It rides on errands and endowments, not on fireworks. The building has a way of shortening stories until they are manageable. Consider marriage, not an elopement festival here, but a policy instrument. Consider punishment, not a whip-crack of spectacle, usually, but the demotion no one can mistake. Lost privileges, reassignment, perhaps a slow goodbye to top copy and a move to the old palace with its quieter afternoons. Households prefer consequences that fit inside ledgers. Scandal burns too much fuel. You peer out through a wooden lattice that makes the world into honeycomb. Beyond, the palace's public courtyards busy themselves with the pageants of empire, audiences, janissary drills, petitions. In here, the pageant is smaller, a child trying not to smudge her primer, a coffee service learning the exact angle at which a cup becomes a gesture, a steward reciting the day's list as if it were a poem. If you came seeking a moral panic, you wander away with a housekeeping manual. Joke 3. You expected a tempest, you got a timetable. The rooms also keep faith with the city beyond their walls. When a mosque is repaired, a school endowed, a fountain added to a dry corner of a neighborhood, a woman from these corridors often signed the paperwork and sent the money. The public square will never say her name loud, but a stone knows the hand that paid for it. That is the other meaning of protected. The harem shelters the power to do boring, durable good. You breathe in the quiet and feel how it rearranges the outline we'll walk. Rank is real, and we will climb its ladder with our slippers on. Origins are complicated, enslavement, diplomacy, adoption, and we will sit with that complexity without pretending it is a bedtime fairy tale. Schooling happens behind screens. Gatekeepers keep gates. Baths steam like tame clouds. Silk has a grammar. Food comes when it should. Healers make their rounds. Discipline lives in files. Mothers cast long shadows. Politics move on soft saws. Marriages become bridges. Princes study. Festivals turn into memory and ink. Dangers arrive as fire and fever more often than as myth. Piety stitches city to palace. Work travels far on thread and paper. Myths meet miniatures and have to sit down. And, after the palace, there is a sunset chapter full of pensions and courtyards and long stories told to grandchildren. For now, you let the room do its small trick. It turns the syllable, harem, from a drumbeat into a lullaby. It asks you to trust that the most restful version of history is not the one that denies sorrow or pretends away the sharp edges, but the one that refuses to trade ordinary dignity for lurid noise. You slide your palm along a tile glaze so smooth it could be a mirror, and in its blue you see exactly what this place wants you to see: a household, guarded and busy, trying to raise children, keep accounts, and make sure the lamps are filled before the wind remembers the windows. The scandal, if there is one, is simply that boredom, dressed in brocade, has been interesting all along. A staircase curls up like a ribbon and deposits you at a landing where titles hang in the air the way perfume does: light, layered, and surprisingly practical. You are here to watch a ladder that prefers slippers, how a girl with good ears and patient hands can climb from novice to manager, from manager to counselor, and in rare, history-altering cases, to the seat behind the throne, the Valide Sultan's suite, where budgets and blessings share a desk. The harem is not a lottery, it is a school with promotions. You start at the ground rung with the anonymous new arrivals, the novices, often filed in the records as kurai, enslaved women, or simply, girls of the apartments. In palace slang many are called odalik, chamber attendants, because rooms teach before teachers do. They shadow senior women, learn to fold a kaftan so the sleeves lie like quiet commas, and memorize which tray belongs to which aunt of which prince. They carry messages and keep time. Their test is not glamour, it's reliability. Joke 1. The first badge of honor here is not a jewel but a key that doesn't get lost out. If a novice's patience has corners you can lean a household on, she becomes a kalfa, a senior attendant. Think shift leader with a better vocabulary. Kalfas specialize: laundry, coffee service, wardrobe, accounts, education. Those who manage other women are USTA mistresses in the craft sense, masters of their rooms, people who can get a feast dressed, a lesson staffed, and a corridor quiet before the muezzin has folded his last note. The language gives away the logic. You don't rise by being ornamental, you rise by being useful. Mainstream fact set on the step where the light is good, the harem's inner hierarchy: novice, kurai/odalik, kalfa, USTA, and then into the orbit of the sovereign as gozde. In the eye, a favorite, Iqbal, a lady in favor, Kaden Effendi, consort, and at times the singular Hasiki Sultan, chief consort, hardened particularly in the 16th and 17th centuries. Harem, Roxolana, raised from concubine to Hasiki under Suleiman, made the title famous. Later centuries modulated the vocabulary, but the latter remained: service management, intimacy, governance by proximity. Over all of it presides the Valide Sultan, mother of the reigning sultan, who outranks everyone but the sovereign and runs the household like a minister with a prayer book. Titles here are not simply names. They are job descriptions with pay scales. A Hazaneater USTA, chief treasurer mistress, holds the purse keys and the stipend lists, her ledgers clean enough to make a janissary quartermaster jealous. A Kalersi USTA minds storerooms, a Kavasi USTA trains coffee bearers until the cup becomes a ceremony. The Kalfas under them draft rosters. Promotions arrive with more than applause: a robe of honor, highlight, a raise in Aki and later Karush, perhaps the right to certain fabrics or a seat nearer the Valide's elbow on feast days. Quirky tidbit for your pocket: some ranks came with literal key belts, silk cords from which small, bright keys hung like punctuation. The sound of them, little chiming commas, told corridors their mistress was near. Another small theater. On festival mornings the senior Kalfas received Bayramlik packages, perfume, sweets, sometimes a bolt of cloth, recorded in elegant divan script like minutes of a particularly fragrant meeting. The zone of favor is where outsiders' imaginations tend to overheat, but the paperwork stays cool. A Gozda or Iqbal is a woman whose character and skill drew the sovereign's regard. She still attends lessons, keeps ritual hours, and answers to the Valide's schedule. If she bears a child who survives, her status solidifies. If the Sultan's affection endures, she may become a Kaden Effendi, a recognized consort, with defined apartments and staff. The Hasiki, when the title exists, coordinates the sovereign's private household and can sponsor endowments with her own seal. It is influence expressed in patronage, fountains, schools, Quran recitations, gifts that leave stone footprints across the city. Historians still argue whether this latter functioned as a rigid bureaucracy or a fluid patronage web. Some emphasize formal ranks and clear lines. Others point to the power of personal networks. Who mentored you? Which USTA noticed your steadiness? Whether the Valide trusted your silence? They also debate the Western word odalisque, which slid over centuries from chamber attendant to a caricature. How much did translation itself invent our fantasies? The record, stamped with stipends and duty rosters, leans toward the boring answer: stability first, charisma second. How does one climb? Etiquette, education, trust. Etiquette here is not snobbery. It's public safety for emotions. You learn who enters first, who sits, who speaks, who carries which tray at which angle. Education is the ballast: reading, calligraphy, recitation, music, arithmetic for household needs, languages if you show an ear, Ottoman, Turkish, and Persian for poetry, Arabic for scripture, sometimes Greek or a Balkan tongue for diplomatic errands. Trust is the currency that never devalues. You are tested with secrets and small sums. If the sums come back straight and the secrets don't leak, the door at the top of the stairs opens another finger wide. Joke 2. In this neighborhood, drama is grounds for demotion. The women who rise, smile, and minor keys keep lists in their heads and make the coffee arrive as if it had always intended to appear just then. The Valide Sultan's shadow crosses every rung like shade in a courtyard. Welcome in summer, bracing in winter. She approves postings, allocates stipends, hears petitions, and, at moments when princes are children, can act as regent, signing decisions that rearrange provinces. Kozum and Turhan wore that mantle with a steadiness that left neighborhoods full of faucets and schools behind them. To the young, the Valide is half grandmother, half prime minister. To the Sultan, she is the one person who can knock on any door without knocking. Mainstream fact again, with a ledger's gravity, the Valide's household treasury disbursed salaries, dowries, festival bonuses, and charitable endowments, vakif, that tied the harem to the city, water fountains, soup kitchens, schools, repairs to mosques. Surviving registers show line after line of regular payments to women by name and rank, a rhythm that contradicts the myth of random whim. Even when palace politics ran hot, the stipend days still came like rain. Caution and kindness structure the upper rungs. Not every favorite becomes a consort. Not every consort stays near the center. Reassignment is the quiet punishment for frayed trust. The old palace is the padded landing for careers that close. Rooms, servants, a pension, and the slow dignity of telling stories to a newer generation. Even at the bright top, work equals worth. A woman who forgets her duties because a title fits well will find the title slips. You pause in a gallery where portraits are really fabrics. Brocades and belts that once rode on particular shoulders. Clothes here are footnotes to rank. Certain weaves announce. USTA. Certain trimmings. Caden. The imperial workshops, Yichli Hiref, produce textiles as paperwork. A pattern could be a pay grade. A newly promoted Kalfa receives not only more coins but a new Kaftan grammar. Cuffs allowed to say what yesterday's cuffs could not. Joke 3. If you ever get lost, follow the quality of the thread. The higher the rank, the smoother the silk, the more invisible the seam. All this latter talk might feel chilly until you watch someone climb it well. A girl with a careful walk becomes a Kalfa who can settle a room with a look. And USTA who kept the ledgers honest becomes the Valide's favorite pair of eyes. A Gozde uses her hour to argue for a school in a muddy quarter she remembers. A Caden Effendi sets aside part of her stipend for widow's bread. The harem's hierarchy, at its best, channels talent into maintenance, of children, of rituals, of streets and cisterns you will never see but will drink from on a hot day. You glance back down the stairs and notice what the latter truly protects: continuity. Sultans change, city winds change, fashions mold. But a household that knows how to promote the calm, train the eager, and retire the tired with dignity can keep its shape longer than any rumor. If you came looking for a miracle, you find a manager's manual instead. And if you are sleepy, that is exactly the point. Boring ladders make safe beds. You follow a clerk with velvet soft footsteps to a doorway labeled only by habit, arrivals. The room opens like a ledger. Columns of faces, lines of languages, entries of hopes that will be rewritten in palace ink. Where did they come from? You ask, and the answer moves in layers, like a city scene from a hill. Caravans and sea lanes first, Black Sea coasts and Caucasian valleys where Circassian, Abkhaz, and Georgian families learned that beauty could become a trade. Balkan towns where war and tribute rearranged households. Mediterranean ports where diplomacy traveled with trunks. Crimea's steppe raids that fed markets you wish had never existed. And sometimes, quieter paths. Orphans gathered by networks that believed the palace could become a school. You stand in the doorway and let the map settle. It is not a romance. It is logistics with prayers. Mainstream fact, set down with the calm weight of registers. By the 16th and 17th centuries, most women who entered the Harem arrived as enslaved persons purchased or presented through imperial channels, often from the Caucasus and Black Sea slave markets. Baptismal pasts were commonly exchanged for conversion to Islam, new names, and systematic training inside the palace. Earlier Ottoman sultans had married freeborn princesses and made alliance that way. Later practice shifted toward consorts drawn from within the harem, a policy that kept dynastic politics inside walls and under the Valide sultan's eyes. You follow the sentence where the other boring truths live. The palace preferred controllable kinship. A steward reads from a list in a voice that could measure flour. New arrivals register age, language, any talents the road forgot to bruise. A senior Kalfa assigns a bed, a tutor, a chore, laundry this week, lessons every morning, manners always. A small dish of sweet sherbet appears, not as decadence but as policy. Sugar calms a frightened throat. Joke 1. Somewhere a bureaucrat has written 2 spoonfuls per uncertainty. And the recipe worked. You watch a quiet ceremony of names. The girl who arrived as Anna or Eileen becomes Nurbanu, Gulbahar, Dilruba, Moonlight, Spring Rose, Heartstealer, names that sound like verses and behave like passwords. The renaming is not erasure so much as translation. The household now knows how to call this person in the language of its rules. She learns to recite the Fatiha, to bow when the room bows, to say, we, where the road taught. I. A tutor shows her the alphabet's long vines, and her hand, hesitant at first, begins to loop through Ottoman script like a boat learning its river. Historians still argue whether the most famous women were who later gossip insisted they were. Whether, for example, Nurbanu began life as a Venetian noble, Cecilia Venir Baffo, or as a Greek or Balkan girl with no pedigree anyone can verify. Whether Safiya was Albanian by birth or conveniently Venetian for storytellers. Whether Kozum's childhood name was Anastasia or something the archive misheard. They argue too about scale. How many came by purchase versus gift? How often diplomacy delivered a niece with a letter? The uncertainty is not a scandal. It is a library reminding you that rumor wears silk better than records do. You sit near a brazier while a novice has her hair combed into the household's grammar, parted this way for lessons, knotted that way for feasts. She practices the palace step: heel, ball, pause, heel, ball, breathe, quiet enough to carry a coffee tray without spilling, firm enough to announce a person who has learned how to belong. The first month is less about charm than about fitting time. Wake at the second call, lessons until the shadow reaches the tile seam, prayers when the corridor's air cools, chores set to the rhythm of teapots and ledgers. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. The wardrobe issues a pair of wooden bath clogs called nullin, their soles carved high to keep hems dry on hot marble. Each pair is numbered in tiny black ink to match the laundry roll. The palace's way of making sure a girl and her feet continue their relationship after steam. Another minor theater, on a novice's naming day. A dab of rosewater is thumbed onto the end paper of her lesson book, so even homework smells faintly like acceptance. The moral geometry inside this doorway is delicate. The palace has taken hold of lives that did not choose to come. It answers by trying, not always succeeding, to make a school out of captivity. Tutors sit where guards would stand. A girl learns to write letters home she cannot send. Later, if trust grows thick, she may be allowed to forward a message with a Kalfa's eyes on the wording, or to send alms by a circuitous path toward a village she can describe in dreams. When someone shows musical talent, an oud arrives. When language comes easily, Persian poems are set like little lamps along a syllable road. This is how time becomes less barbed. You trace the paperwork that follows a girl like a shadow. There is a stipend line, small at first, then more as she proves steady, entered in a Mevasib register alongside soap rations and bolt allocations. There is a health note, a mild fever last week, a rosewater compress worked. There is a behavior line, punctual to lessons, patient with younger ones, needs practice with trays. These ledger notes are not poetry, they are the palace's bedside manner. Households without paperwork resort to panic. Sometimes origin arrives wrapped in diplomacy. A governor's household presents a gifted girl in hopes that a tiny loyalty will later become a favor. An allied clan prefers to send a niece to courtly schooling rather than to a marriage it cannot oversee. Such entries walk softer at first, letters attached, expectations declawed by custom. The Valide's office memorizes their threads and refuses to pull too hard. A palace is not a net, it is a loom. Joke 2, the harem's notion of a welcome package is a primer, a schedule, and a sewing kit, which, depending on your temperament, is either a hug or a to-do list. Conversion, when it happens, is brisk and formal and then lifelong in the small ways that matter. You learn the prayers. You learn the calendar of feasts. You learn which hours taste like stillness. No one pretends the road before is erased. It is simply folded like a letter and placed in a drawer you do not open every day. Women tell each other their real childhood names at night sometimes, the way sailors list stars. They don't need those names to sail, but it comforts them to know where they live. Mainstream fact returns with the accountant's nod. Freed status, a zadly, was common for senior women when they married out or retired to the old palace. Manumission documents and dowry lists survive, revealing that many who arrived as slaves left as patrons, with stipends, servants, and a little cushion of coin to make the outside world less hard. The path was not straight for everyone. It existed, and existence is not nothing. The room also keeps a register of sorrow the myths ignore. Not every reunion letter finds a road. Not every tutor's patience turns fear into song. Some girls drift, some tangle, some are sent to quieter rooms where work is simpler and windows face trees. The household handles this the way it handles other storms, with schedule, with elders whose voices have the weight of blankets, with the quiet mercy of tasks that can be done sitting down. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman demand for Caucasian origin women distorted those regions' societies more by trade or by prestige, whether families pushed daughters toward palace paths for imagined honor or whether traffickers dragged honor behind their wagons. They argue numbers and moral weights because history must. Your tired eyes favor a simpler obligation tonight, to look at the tiles and say out loud that much here began without the consent we would require, and that some people inside these walls tried, within their strange toolkit, to soften that beginning with schooling, stipends, and futures that included keys. Joke 3 glides in like a cat. A novice asks her tutor what rank comes after being new, and the tutor smiles, knowing where the towels are. It's silly and exactly right. Belonging is always first practical. When you leave the arrivals room, you've learned to dislike grand statements. The harem is a machine built from particulars. A cart from the market sets down oranges. A clerk in a plain turban folds a manumission form. A girl, newly named, carries a tray to a woman who will teach her that influence is quieter than a drum and longer than a psalm. Origins are hard. The palace's answer is a calendar, a syllabus, a key belt, and the stubborn hope that tomorrow's chores will be less frightening than today's. You turn into a quiet corridor where voices practice being smaller than the tiles. Screens of carved wood make lace out of sunlight. Behind them, a lesson begins the way bread begins, measured, ordinary, necessary. Schooling, the room says, is what keeps a palace from dissolving into gossip. You sit where the lattice lets syllables through, and you discover how a household teaches its own weather, how to speak like a petition, how to bow like a paragraph, how to sign your name in ink that refuses to run when the day does. The first class is language, the palace's favorite tool. A senior Kalfa taps a tablet, and you hear Ottoman Turkish roll like a carriage. Turkic roots carrying Persian flowers and Arabic roof beams. New mouths learn the trio in miniature, Arabic for prayer and formula, Persian for poetry and courtly compliment, Turkish for the walk from kitchen to council. Some girls, quick with ears, collect more Greek from an old nurse, a Balkan tongue from a friend who misses her river, Italian phrases from a merchant's ledger. Mainstream fact set on the shelf with primers. Palace schooling for women never matched the formal Enderun Academy on the men's side, but tutors, religious scholars, court calligraphers, music masters, literate Kalfas, regularly taught reading, recitation, and basic account keeping. Elite consorts in the Valide Sultan often added Arabic and Persian literacy to manage correspondence and pious endowments. Vakif. The result is a competence you can sit on, enough scripture to pray well, enough poetry to host, enough arithmetic to keep the kitchen honest. Next comes recitation. A teacher mends a line of Quran with a finger, and the girls mend it with breath, catching the melody of tajwid like a shawl. Devotional poems follow, not hymns to the prophet, couplets by Fuseli turned into lullabies. The voices stay soft because soft lasts. Nothing here is learned by shouting. Joke 1. The sternest teacher in the room is a sandglass that scolds equally, and it has never raised its voice. Calligraphy is the palace's slow sport. A reed pen, Callum, soaks in water the way patience soaks the day. The ink pot smells faintly of lamp black and gum Arabic, a perfume you later discover you associate with calm. Nask for clarity, Thilith for grandeur, talc for letters that lean like people who trust each other, scripts become personalities, and the most glamorous path up the ladder is sometimes just a steady hand. Lessons are not only aesthetic, they are administrative. A woman who writes a clean hand can annotate a stipend list, draft a petition, label a trunk, correct a steward's figures with 3 curves and a dot. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Novices practice on reusable tablets lacquered with egg white. Lines are traced, dried, then wiped with lemon water when the page has served. Thrifty tutors call this ink that knows how to forgive. Musicians arrive with makam the way bakers arrive with yeast. An oud rests like a boat in a lap. A cannon lies on a cushion like sailcloth strung with gold. The teacher hums a scale, Rast, Husseini, Hikaz, and the room learns that modes are moods you can borrow when your own won't cooperate. Singing is less performance than behavioral science. You teach breath, and the breath teaches patience. Instrument hours also disguise other lessons. How to host, how to pause, how to angle a compliment so it lands like a feather and not like a coin. The doors remain closed because music, like counsel, travels better in small rooms first. Then manners, which in this house are their own language. The Valide's attendant demonstrates an entrance, and the girls copy it until the floor believes them. Bowing is not worship, it is traffic control for feelings. Serve to the right. Never turn your back on a grandparent. Do not let a tray outrun a conversation. Never hand the coffee before the question. Etiquette is not an ornament. It is a safety harness in a building where emotions, power, and memory share tables. A girl who learns these measures can later manage a feast, a petition line, or a crisis without raising her pulse. Historians still argue whether female literacy in the palace was broad or boutique, whether basic reading and household accounts reached most ranks or remained primarily the province of senior women near the center. They also argue whether court chroniclers, largely male, undercounted women's learning, or whether later romantic retellings overcounted it. Evidence survives in stubborn forms: endowment deeds signed with practiced hands, letters from Harem to foreign rulers that a secretary surely polished but a mind had to intend, inventories written by women who knew the difference between a robe and a budget. Your sleepy verdict does not pick a side. It notices that schooling here leaves fingerprints on fountains, in margins, along the golden road. A tutor in household accounts arrives with 2 abacuses, one for the girls, one for the steward, embarrassed to discover the girls are faster. Bread, meat, charcoal, soap, rosewater, candle oil. The palace is a supply problem with poetry folded in. A novice learns to tally portions and to mistrust round numbers. And USTA learns that a neat ledger is an act of public charity. Numbers keep everyone from inventing stories when coins go missing. Joke 2, in this room, romance, is a column that adds up on the first try. You peek into a patronage lesson disguised as embroidery. The pattern on the frame is a fountain inscription. Each stitch is a word of a prayer that will later hang in a neighborhood square. A senior woman explains Vakif, how to fund repairs for a mosque, a school, a soup kitchen, how to write a deed that won't let a cousin siphon soup, how to appoint a trustee and then forgive them for aging. Girls learn that power flows neatly when it is written down. The harem's reputation in the city is not only rumor, it is marble with someone's handwriting on it. Across the hall, the letter-writing master rehearses salutations. How do you address a provincial governor's wife? A judge's household? A guild of silk weavers? Letters are bridges that carry requests further than slippers can. A well-phrased compliment oils hinges. A sloppy one jams them. Seals are explained like weather, round for private, oval for formal. The Valide's signet an eclipse that everyone recognizes with a little flutter in the chest. A girl stamps her first envelope and looks 10 minutes older. The ceremony class meets in a room with lines drawn faintly on the floor. Positions for Harem greetings, for processions observed through screens, for receiving guests from the women's quarters of foreign embassies. The drill is almost military in its calm. By repetition, shyness becomes choreography. During feasts, girls will become furniture that breathes, standing where the room needs weight, moving tea where the conversation needs glue. Glory here is the ability to measure a pause. Mainstream fact returns wearing a music teacher's smile. Ottoman court culture invested heavily in arts of composure, calligraphy, poetry, measured recitation, regulated hospitality, because empires are held as much by manners as by muskets. In the women's household, those arts were the curriculum that produced people who could host, mediate, and give without igniting rivalries. Even notorious political seasons rode on women who had learned, somewhere behind a screen, to put a room at ease before moving it. Quirky tidbit number 2, some tutors sweetened calligraphy drills with sugar lozenges stamped with letters. Every good page bought a letter you could dissolve on your tongue. The effect was Pavlovian and charming. Years later, A senior USTA tasting sherbet would swear she could still feel an olive melt. The quiet influence this schooling builds looks like nothing until you let it add up. A consort who writes a decent Persian couplet can flatter a scholar into serving as a grandson's tutor. A valide who keeps ceremonial timing can ease a quarrel between two ministries by seating their wives just so at a feast behind screens. A kalfa who counts without fuss keeps a kitchen free of the lies that come in with flour. None of this will make a battle map. All of this will make a city sleep. Joke 3 pads and polite as a cat. A music master stops a piece and says, "Again, but with fewer opinions," and the room improves. By the time the sun has moved one lattice square to the left, you have learned that screens aren't only wood, they are methods. They filter noise, teach pace, and let skill arrive before reputation. The harem schooling is underlit on purpose. If it works, the only thing you notice at a festival is that everything felt inevitable. Someone had to make inevitability. She probably learned her letters on a tablet that smelled faintly of lemons. When you stand, the tutor sets a reed pen across your palm, an honorary loan. The nib is cut on a slant so the stroke can fatten and thin without panic. That, you suspect, is the soul of this place's education. Learn how to make lines that hold, even when the day does not. Tomorrow we will walk baths and corridors. Tonight you leave with a lullaby lodged in your pocket. Grammar, ink breath, and steps, small disciplines that outlive fashion and keep households from becoming rumors. You take 3 quiet steps and meet the reason these corridors feel like a library that knows self-defense. A man in a dark kaftan, soft shoes, and a calm that has learned to count. He looks past you the way doorkeepers do, measuring the hallway, not the visitor, and then inclines his head with that tiny economy that can open or close a world. This is a eunuch, a harem aga, one of the palace's gatekeepers. In a building that lives on schedules and promises, he is the hinge. He gestures, and you fall into the tide he directs. Black eunuchs, many from African regions, converted, trained, and posted within, guard and manage the women's household. White eunuchs, most often from the Balkans and Caucasus, control the routes between the inner men's palace and the sovereign's threshold. The titles carry their geography like watermarks. The Kisler Aga, chief of the black eunuchs, is the harem steward and messenger-in-chief. The Babasad Aga, chief of the white eunuchs, keeps the gate of felicity, the formal door to the sovereign's chambers and the council's audience. Mainstream fact, set down as plainly as a seal on wax. From the late 16th century onward, the Kisler Aga oversaw the imperial harem and administered vast pious endowments connected to Mecca and Medina, the Hermine of Kafi, while the Babasad Aga supervised the inner palace pages and controlled ceremonial access to the Sultan. If the Golden Road is the palace's bloodstream, these two are its valves. You walk with the Kisler Aga a little way and learn his favorite word, permission. His day is an exchange of folded notes and folded moments. A consort seeks an audience with the valide. A tutor requests new primers. A steward asks for extra charcoal before the wind turns. A courier from the outer palace brings a line from the Grand Vizier that needs to enter as gently as a cat. The Kisler Aga's nod can move any of these through a door without bruising rank. Joke 1. He is part maitre d', part traffic officer, part lullaby. Messages ride in silk wrappers with wax seals you've already learned to respect. The Aga tucks his divot, the slim pen case and inkwell, into his sash so replies can be drafted on a knee board without fuss. He carries a staff not as theater but as punctuation. Its tap announces. The door is about to think. When he stops, the corridor inhales. When he moves, the corridor releases its breath and resumes being a hallway instead of a rumor. Historians still argue whether the rise of the black eunuchs to preeminence inside the harem, especially under sultans like Murad III, owed more to a careful strategy of balancing power centers, janissaries, viziers, and palace pages, or more to the personal networks of formidable Valide sultans who preferred stewards fully tied to their household. They also dispute how much authority the Kisler Aga held over the holy city's endowments out of piety versus politics. Your sleepy middle answer tonight is domestic. Whatever the high reasons, households borrowed the loyalties they trusted. You notice the layers of guarding. At the outer gardens, the bastanchi, those gardeners, who are also disciplined guards, patrol and steer traffic. At the formal interior threshold, the Babasad Aga's men orchestrate ceremonies so the sovereign is not surprised by his own house. In the women's city within the city, the Kisler Aga and his corps become the harem's postal service, constables, ushers, and hall monitors combined. Their presence keeps lessons from becoming auditions and errands from becoming epics. Mainstream fact returns like a ledger you can trust. The Kisler Aga commanded the Harem Agalari, Black Eunuch Corps, controlled keys, rosters, and night rounds, and acted as intermediary for correspondence between the Valide Sultan, consorts, and the sovereign. Names of powerful chiefs survive in stone. Hasai Bazur Aga in the 18th century endowed libraries, fountains, and schools across Istanbul. His seal appears on deeds that still water thirsty streets. Power here leaves footprints you can drink from. The work is as much custodial as it is courtly. A young prince's classroom needs to be quiet at the right hour. A bath needs to be heated exactly so. The golden road must be kept clear for festival coin scattering. You remember the story. And for ordinary afternoons when small feet race from lesson to nap. The Kisler Aga knows how to make a festival behave and a Tuesday feel inevitable. He is the household's thermostat. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Palace inventories list the eunuch's soft-soled slippers and lanterns with patterned brass shades. Their light throws gentle latticework on the tiles during night rounds so sleeping rooms won't wake to a glare. The detail is small, and that's exactly why it matters. Guardianship, done well, is often a choice about lamplight. The gate of felicity sits a world away and also 1 minute from here, because palaces fold space like paper. There, the Babasad Aga keeps the choreography that makes empire look easy. Audience rugs at measured angles, petitioners arranged so urgency doesn't elbow protocol, pages placed so their first steps into service feel like belonging and not like falling. You glimpse him once, and it is like seeing a clock show you its gears. Historians still argue whether the eunuch's political influence peaked during the so-called Sultanate of Women, or whether it extended in steadier lines across later centuries, shape-shifting with each sovereign's habits. They tally moments when a Kisler Aga brokered alliances, redirected endowment income, or outmaneuvered a minister, and moments when he became a scapegoat for ills he could not have engineered. The record, like a corridor at dusk, is full of corners. Your hands prefer what you can hold, rosters, keys, and the hum of a night patrol that checks every latch. You shadow a brief petition hour. A Kalfa requests extra muslin for baby shirts. A tutor asks permission to copy a commentary from the palace library. A physician submits a list of rosewater and cumin for winter. A novice's transfer to laundry is approved with a kind word about her arithmetic, useful for storerooms. Each small decision keeps 10 other things from wobbling. The Kisler Aga is not a judge so much as a balancer. He moves weight around the boat you live in. The human texture here is denser than titles. Some eunuchs arrive as boys, learn the building like a map, and rise by discretion, memory, and kindness. They remind you of our earlier tutors. The best ones are boring on purpose. They do not collect secrets. They store them as needed and then forget them politely. They know which doors squeak and which tempers do. Both get a drop of oil. Joke 2. If you want to find the most trusted man in a palace, follow the person who always carries extra lamp wicks. The moral weather around their role is complicated and you name it without raising your voice. Lives began elsewhere and were remade by force. Within that hard frame, some men became patrons of schools and fountains, readers of books, quiet uncles to princes who needed a safe pair of eyes. Others played politics too hard and landed in the history books as warnings. The building's answer to these possibilities is the same one it gives everywhere: process. Rotas, sign-in boards for night rounds, sealed logs for messages carried, double counts for keys. Households that live on personalities eventually drown in them. Households that live on paperwork sleep. Mainstream fact again, this time wearing a festival sash. On great days, Harem, circumcision pageants, imperial weddings. The Kisler Aga supervised harem vantage points and sidelines so women could watch through screened galleries safely, and he coordinated the distribution of festival gifts inside. The Babasad Aga timed the sovereign steps to and from council so the city's roar became a measured cheer. It is power of a kind that leaves no headline and all the comfort. You ask what happens when a storm blows. Fire in the kitchens, a fever in the nursery, a coup rumor at the gate. The answer is a list. Evacuation directions, water lines, where to move ledgers and jewels, how to get children to the marble baths. They don't burn until the smoke thins. Who speaks to whom so panic does not invent a second problem. The Kisler Aga is an index of calm contingencies. History remembers spectacular exceptions. Households survive by ordinary plans. Historians still argue whether the scale of African enslavement into the Ottoman core was primarily driven by palace demand or by broader markets and rural labor needs. They also debate how much religious status and manumission softened, or failed to soften, the original wound. Your task tonight is not to settle their columns but to keep the corridor honest. The power you admire here grew from beginnings we would not choose. The quiet good it sometimes did deserves to be counted without excusing anything. Joke 3 pads in with the measured charm of a night watch. The Kisler Aga pauses at a door you recognize, the schoolroom from yesterday, and listens for exactly one thing: silence at the right hour. He smiles, counts to 5 the way a metronome counts a room into order, and moves on. You realize that his authority is almost always auditory. He hears the palace the way a captain hears a ship. When you part, he does not give a speech. He nods to a junior, who vanishes down the golden road to fetch a tray you did not know you needed, and to a senior, who adjusts the evening roster so someone with a cough can rest. Authority, here, tastes like tea arriving exactly on time. You carry that taste into the next hallway, understanding better why the harem's schooling, ladders, and ledgers don't dissolve into legend. Because men like this, in shoes that favor quiet over swagger, turn doors into sentences that begin and end where they should. You take the next turn and the palace stops being an institution and becomes a neighborhood. Rooms open and close with the shyness of birds. Corridors choose which way sound is allowed to travel. Courtyards breathe like lungs. If you came here with a postcard of one big chamber stuffed with rumor, you can fold it away now. What you walk is a small, walkable city, tuned to privacy and ritual, with just enough architecture to keep tempers from bumping into each other. The floor under your feet is the Golden Road, Altan Yal, a long, narrow corridor that threads the harem like a quiet spine. Light falls through high grills. The tiles on one side catch it. The tiles on the other pretend not to notice. On feast days, the story goes, a sultan would stroll here and scatter coins for the women and children at his side. On ordinary days, this isn't a parade route. It's a conveyor belt for calm. Doors open off it to classrooms, small salons, the Valide suite, storerooms, and the baths. Every few paces a discreet niche holds a lamp, because even corridors deserve little stars. Joke 1. If a hallway could hum, this one would sing a lullaby in 3/4 time. Mainstream fact, placed like a brass plaque where you can see it. The top copy harem expanded dramatically in the late 16th century, especially under Murad III, with major works attributed to Mimar Sinan and his school. The Valide Sultan apartments, princes' rooms, and bath complexes date from this architectural bloom. The Golden Road connected the imperial private chambers to the women's city within, making movement possible without turning privacy into a rumor. Throughout, Iznik tiles, 16th and 17th century ceramics with cobalt, emerald, and the famous Armenian bowl red, became the building's handwriting, rooms first. The word oda is modest, a chamber that behaves like a sentence, subject, a bed platform dressed in quilts, verb, a brazier with charcoal in winter, object, a low chest, a shelf for books. Windows were mashrabia, carved wooden lattice, so light arrives like patterned silence, and breezes from the Bosphorus cool without gossiping with the neighbors. In winter, Mongols, braziers, and corner okak fireplaces keep hands flexible for embroidery. In summer, clear stories mouth the wind in a way that teaches you to nap well. Each cluster of rooms belongs to a rank, novices here, Kalphas and Ustas there, consorts closer to the Valide's orbit, the Valide's own suite with its mosaic logic of sitting rooms, sleeping rooms, and a panel of tiles so brilliant it acts like a second window. Corridors next. They are filters, not merely connectives. Some are airy, made to swallow footsteps. Others are padded with rugs so that toddlers can learn sovereignty's first lesson: don't run, without bruises. You notice small architectural manners, thresholds a hair higher than usual to slow entries, door leaves that insist on being pushed with open hands, not shoulders, corners cut at 45 degrees so trays don't panic. The building's design is an etiquette coach, then the baths. The harem's hammam is a planet with its own weather. You step into the Sogakluk cool room, where marble benches and striped towels teach you to shed the days slowly. Through an arched mouth lies the Aliklik, warm room, where loosens jewelry and conversation. Beyond, the Sikaklik, hot room, glows, a dome chamber pricked with starry glass insets, a Göbektasi, the great heated belly stone. In the center, basins around the edges with brass ibrick ewers waiting like obedient comets. The ritual is a choreography you could memorize in your sleep: warm, pour, keys, exfoliating mitt, rinse, rest, rosewater. Bodies become uninteresting here in the best possible way. Clean is the only hierarchy. Mainstream fact again, this time wearing steam. Ottoman hammams, including palace baths, were heated by hypocaust, a furnace, kulhan, that pushed hot air under floors and through wall flues. Rooms were arranged as cold/warm/hot to stage the body's journey. In Topkapi the harem contained double baths, paired suites. For the Valide and for the inner household, some works credited to Sinan. Water ran in channels behind the basins. Attendants managed temperature with a competence that would make a pharmacist jealous. You settle on the edge of the Göbektasi and watch the palace do a social miracle. The bath is a commons where rank temporarily softens. A novice carries towels for an elder. A Kalfa inquires after a tutor's cough. A consort asks a girl how her letters are coming and means it. The discipline of modesty doesn't vanish. It simply takes a seat nearer the steam and listens. A visitor would look for intrigue. The room offers maintenance instead, of pores, of friendships, of nerves. Joke 2, the loudest argument is about water temperature, and even that ends in laughter when someone remembers the kettle. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Palace hammams used wooden clogs, nullin, with mother-of-pearl inlay for senior women, plain carved beech for novices. The clatter of inlay on marble was once described by a court scribe as rain that forgot to be wet. Soap cakes were sometimes stamped with the imperial tugra, the Sultan's calligraphic monogram, so even bubbles knew their paperwork. And in the furnace room, the Kulhansi stokers hung bunches of bay leaves so the smoke, however faint, would smell like soup rather than like siege. Courtyards, islands of microclimate between rooms and rituals. A square with a fountain quiet enough to erase 3 anxieties. A rectangle where orange and pomegranate trees make spring feel reliable. a narrow court that exists solely to loan sunlight to a hallway at 10 a.m. during winter. Here women sit with tambour frames and carnelian thimbles, children chase shadows, and someone reads a petition aloud to an ant who has perfected the art of saying, yes, so slowly it becomes. Guidance. On feast days, carpets appear on ledges like terraces. Screened galleries above the outer courts become theaters where processions are watched and catalogued. Who carried which standard, which regiment's stirrups sang, whether the pastry cooks outdid themselves at the confectioner's parade. Historians still argue whether the Golden Road coin tradition was truly a routine court custom or a later embroidery for visitors' ears. They also debate whether certain tiny barred rooms along inner corridors were intended primarily for storage, servants' rest, or occasional seclusion in tense years. Architecture leaves clues, not memoirs. Your bedtime synthesis lets both possibilities sit. The corridor earned its name from access and light either way, and rooms that look stern on a plan often lived ordinary, useful lives. You learn how the building handles sound. Fountains are not just pretty. They are white noise generators that keep conversations local. Thick walls let lullabies pass but stop news from sprinting. Cupboards double as mute panels behind which letters are read. The mosque call drifts in like a cue rather than an interruption. A corridor can carry a shout, this one carries timing. If a quarrel happens here, humans, after all, it usually happens under a dome where the echo makes everyone feel sillier than their opinions. Fire and water rules run like ribs through the plan. Brass jars sit by doorways. Water niches line service corridors. Kitchens are held a couple of courtyards away. Ledgers that matter have travel cases so they can be lifted to stone rooms in a hurry. The earthquake answer is also architectural. Low spans, timber ties, a preference for many small rooms over one grand hazard. A house that expects the earth to move sleeps lighter and better. Mainstream fact returns in a librarian's cardigan. The harem's rooms include distinct suites, Balide Sultan apartments, Hasiki's rooms, when that title existed, prince's quarters, Khalfa and USTA dormitories, schoolrooms, storerooms, and hammams, arranged around courts with named functions. Maps made by palace officials and visiting diplomats alike show this graded privacy. With the Kisler Aga and his court controlling internal gates so movement never outpaces manners. You find yourself admiring the boring genius of it all. Geometry replaces drama. Right angles beat rumors. Stone benches do more pastoral work than sermons. A woman can live a whole day here. The lesson, the tray, the prayer, the stitch, the bath, without the world ever becoming sharp. That is not to say it is a cloud. Rules can cut, and we will meet their edges later. But built space, when it is kind, makes human weather kinder. Joke 3. A novice asks why the corridor is so long, and an ant answers. So apologies have time to organize themselves before you arrive. As you step back onto the Golden Road, you realize the architecture has been teaching what our earlier rooms said: ladders are safer than leaps. Gates are kinder than gossip. Baths are better at politics than speeches. A corridor can be a prayer if it faces the right doors. The palace is a school that learned masonry. Somewhere ahead, the kitchen rehearses its evening cadence. Somewhere behind, the baths are still steaming like tamed clouds. You walk, and the tiles let your footsteps count instead of guess. You slip past a linen cupboard that breathes like a sleeping cat and enter a room where cloth does the talking. Racks stand like polite forests, caftans with shoulders that remember festivals, belts that have opinions, bolts of silk so saturated they could sweeten tea just by being looked at. You have been learning the palace's grammar. Now you learn its punctuation, thread, weave, color, and how a scene can be a sentence about rank. A Khalfa lays out the day's lesson on a low table. 3 swatches that look at first like cousins and then like different species. Kema, heavy brocade with patterns that keep their posture. Sarasur, gold and silver woven cloth that thinks it is sunrise. Katma, cut velvet whose shadow is a second color. She taps motifs and the room nods. Sintamani, those 3 pearls with twin wavy stripes that once traveled from Central Asian tigers into Ottoman closets. Says leaves that curl like disciplined flames. Cloud bands imported from a Chinese sky and told to behave. Mainstream fact, folded as neatly as a cuff, the Imperial Workshops grouped under Yhli Hiref, the community of skilled hands, and the design studio Nakashain supplied patterns and quality control while Bursa thrummed as the Empire's silk engine, feeding top copy and the city's guilds with bolts dyed in cochineal crimson, indigo, weld, and madder. The wardrobe you're seeing isn't improvisation, it's policy with a loom. Clothes here are rank translated into fiber. A novice's first kaftan is sturdy, with sleeves that forgive spills and a color the tiles won't tattle about. A promoted kalfa earns cuffs with a narrow braid, then a touch of velvet at the collar that says, "In charge," without shouting. Ustas where weaves you can hear if you listen, brocade that whispers when it turns. Consorts near the Valide Sultan acquire belts, kemer, with clasps that flash like punctuation, jade cabochons, enamel blossoms, seed pearls that only misbehave under noon. The Valide's own wardrobe is an index of serenity, deep indigo and pomegranate hues, fabrics thick with gold thread that somehow refuse to be loud. Joke 1. If you can hear a kaftan before you see it, someone forgot what the word dignity means. You try to read a kaftan's cut the way you read a stanza. Side gores for movement, pockets hidden in the placket for muska, triangular amulets a grandmother slipped in with a prayer, tiny inner ties that keep the garment obedient when the wind dreams of the Bosphorus. Inside were means gamlek, sheer chemise, salver, trousers soft enough to nap in, antari, long-fitted robe, then the kaftan, then the sash, then, for outdoors, a ferris that lets the city mind its own business. Headgear inside is modest, gauzy Yemeni scarves, sometimes an aigrette, sorguk, on festival days, a disciplined feather with a jewel at its throat. Historians still argue whether colors were tightly regulated by sumptuary rules or more governed by taste and supply, whether only certain ranks could wear particular reds and metallic weaves, or whether the house enforced tone rather than palette. They also argue about motif meanings. Does Sintamani carry Buddhist echoes of power and protection, or did the court love it simply because 3 pearls and 2 stripes look like fortune learning geometry? The record gives you edicts in one column and portraits in another. You hold both and let the fabrics teach you that rules often arrive as habits. A senior Hazaneater USTA, the treasurer mistress with the key belt you can hear from 3 doorways away, unlocks a chest that has behaved for 100 winters. Inside, a robe of honor, highlight, waits, its lining so soft you briefly forgive moths for existing. You have already learned how promotions are announced with keys. Now you watch one be announced with cloth. A woman steps forward, steady, unexciting, which is a compliment in this house, and the robe becomes a memory that will outlast 2 kitchens and an earthquake. Mainstream fact again, stamped in the border, highlight ceremonies threaded court life. Officials outside the harem received them publicly in council, women inside received them privately with stipends. Registers list recipients and fabrics with an accountant's exactitude. The palace prints favor with a loom. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. The wardrobe keeps sachets of clove and mastic stitched into hems and stored between folded layers to perfume and protect. A junior once stitched a coffee bean into her cuff on exam day. For luck. And the story, instantly promoted to folklore, resulted in a ban on legumes entering sleeves for a month. Another small sweetness. Some kaftans were lined with fur, sable, ermine, broadtail, cut so thin the garment sighed rather than bragged. Winter in stone rooms asks for mercy. Fur provided it, if you could afford the conversation with ethics your century didn't always have. Belts do more than glitter. A cusack, the woven sash, binds posture, A jeweled camera announces authority over a storeroom or a ceremony. The clasp has its own politics. Emerald implies piety and serious funds. Ruby suggests festival heat. Turquoise winks like the Bosphorus when it pretends to be shallow. Attached to some belts hang chatelaines, yes, palace ones, tiny scissors, needle cases, coal tubes, a seal. Rank here comes with tools. Joke 2. You can always find the woman in charge. She's the one whose belt could mend a treaty and a hem. You ask about storage, because order is the harem's real luxury. The top copy treasury today keeps hundreds of sultanic caftans, survivors folded like patients. Some worn once, some worn until their elbows memorized counsels. In the women's city, wardrobes travel in registries. Which garment belongs to whom? Which festival requires which sleeve length? Which piece is due for relining before winter? Which fur must visit the cedar chest before moths remember math? A cephalic, little desk, keeps pins, hooks, and the small ledgers where fabric becomes narrative. 2 handspans off the hem for ice. Add braid to cuffs for Bayram. Repair to near pocket. Story withheld. Mainstream fact returns with a needle between its teeth. The EHLI hierarchy was not just weavers. It was an umbrella for goldsmiths, embroiderers, furriers, dyers, and pattern drawers, often paid by the palace and regular stipends. Their designs sometimes carry signatures tucked into vines and cloud bands. Surviving Muhim, important affairs, records show orders for bolts, inventories of dyestuffs, payments to bursa guilds, and complaints when a batch bled color onto a jealous neighbor at the baths. Bureaucracy, it turns out, can launder. The palace also knows how to dress feelings. Mourning asks for deeper tones, less metal, sleeves that move slower. Bayram wants cuffs that catch light, bindali, that velvet embroidered with metallic vines, on young women who haven't yet learned to look bored at praise. Circumcision festivals for princes demand festival belts that joke without speaking. Weddings send bolts out with dowries like bright promises that keep their receipts. Clothes, here are calendars you can wear. Historians still argue whether the harem's tailoring was mostly in-house or largely contracted to city ateliers, with palace women doing fittings and small alterations while master tailors in the bazaar cut the major pieces. Some registers point inward, palace-paid seamstresses, others outward, guild invoices. The likely answer is both: ordinary maintenance at home, heavy lifting in the city, designs checked by a mistress whose eyebrow could fold a shop for a week. You finger a sleeve and feel weight, not oppression, just the deliberate gravity of woven metal thread. A woman wearing Saracen knows she is carrying a small ceremony. She adjusts how she turns, which also adjusts how a room behaves. Even in private, clothes teach tempo. That is their secret politics. They measure bodies so conversations don't spill. Uniforms do that in armies. Caftans do it here, with better color choices. Quirky tidbit number 2, fragrance is part of the wardrobe. An ambergris bead on a thread near the neck. A rose attar dabbed on the inside wrist. For some, a sandalwood chip tucked into a belt purse. The idea is not to overwhelm, it's to make memory friendly. Years later, a retired USTA in the old palace will catch a whiff of clove and remember a winter when the bath steam looked like silk. Beneath all the shine, maintenance hums. Laundresses know how to talk to dyes like teachers talk to sulky students. Soap is chosen not to boss gold thread around. Sunlight is rationed so crimson doesn't sulk into pink. The mangle sings. The iron purrs. A small army of hands coaxes wrinkles into compliance the way a tutor coaxes nerves into a recitation. In a household that loathes scandal, a well-pressed seam is a kind of peace treaty. Joke 3 wanders in with a thimble on its finger. A novice asks how to tell if a belt is too much, and the mistress says, "If you can see it in the golden road before you step into it, choose the other one." When you finally step back from the racks, the room has taught you what titles could not. Status here is not a crown. It's a fabric budget spent on predictability. The caftan that signals authority is the one that allows a ceremony to feel inevitable, the belt that holds a day together, the cuff that tells a corridor which speed to walk. You think of our keys from earlier, of the bath clogs with their tiny stars, of the sugar lozenge letters that turn drills into treats. All of it adds up to a house that dresses its calm so it won't get lost. You breathe in thread and clove and a trace of cedar, and you feel exactly what the wardrobe wants you to feel, composed. You follow a scent you could almost chew, cinnamon talking to clove, lamb promising to behave, and the harem turns into a timetable you can taste. The kitchens sit a respectful distance from the rooms, close enough for trays to arrive hot, far enough for smoke to keep its opinions outdoors. A bell that isn't a bell, more a practiced clack of wooden spoons, announces the hour. You've learned by now, in this household, food is a schedule and quiet is a skill. The day keeps its shape because pots and prayers agree on when to breathe. The first landmark is sound. Before dawn, the corridor hears the low thread of a reciter in the valide's suite, far rising like steam. Then water, discreet and confident, makes its brief music in basins. A junior Kalfa slips toward the kitchen with the night's bread order rolled in her sleeve. By the time the first violet of morning spills into the courtyards, ovens have decided their moods and scene. The great round trays line up like obedient moons waiting to orbit rooms. Joke 1. A tray here has better manners than most newspaper columns. It only tells the news it's asked to carry. Mainstream fact, set down as calmly as a ladle. Topkapi's palace complex contained vast imperial kitchens, including the Horrifying, confectionery and sherbet house, and specialized rooms for soups, pilafs, pastries, and preserves. In and near the harem, service kitchens prepared meals for the women's household, with shared trays set on short stands, safra, for small groups to eat together cross-legged. Sherbets, rose, sour cherry, lemon, tamarind, violet, were brewed in the Horrifying and cooled with ice from icehouses in summer. Coffee, an Ottoman court habit from the 16th century, arrived to women's rooms in a ritual of little cups that carried more choreography than liquid. Breakfast is quiet arithmetic, bowls of korba, soup, that forgive a nervous stomach, warm pied bread whose crust sighs when you listen, white cheese, olives, honey that claims it remembers time, a herb omelette if the morning is generous. The trays serve no speeches. For women's share, one pours, another minds the spoons. Spoons, by the way, matter boxwood or pearwood, sometimes mother of pearl inlay for senior hands, shaped so a mouth never feels scolded. A woman's name might be burned delicately into the handle, which makes spoons the most polite form of property in the building. The clock then yields to lessons, you remember, and you pass a familiar lattice toward the kitchen's second sunrise, midday. Dur is a hinge. After prayer, steam rehearses its entrances for lunch. Pilaf leads, rice kissed with broth until each grain stands up politely. Stew follows, lamb that has learned the patience of apricots. Yaprak sarma, vine leaves wrapping rice like lullabies. Salads that remember gardens in winter with parsley and lemon. Trays float down the golden road with the same hush that coins once had on feast days. Both kinds of generosity moving along the same tile. The Horrifying keeps its own weather. A confectioner lifts a copper pan and a ribbon of sugar writes a sentence in the air. Matsuin, spice paste with a pharmacist's conscience, finds tiny jars. Quince learns to glow from the inside. Rose becomes a liquid memory labeled sherbet and set to cool in the snow of last winter, rescued from ice pits the way you rescue a story from a loud rumor. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Palace inventories list snow and ice contracts, with carters bringing packed mountain snow to summer icehouses, Kurhane. Sherbets were sometimes served over grated ice in metal cups, a small meteorology lesson delivered to grateful throats. Between trays, the household practices its quiet hours. After ASR, in the warm part of the afternoon, the palace tries on hush. Children are nudged toward hammocks of story. Seniors claim cushions under orange leaves. Busy hands take up embroidery that sounds like moth wings. This isn't idleness, it's maintenance for tempers. The eunuch's slippers, you remember, are soft for this reason. Even the fountain seems to whisper. Think generous thoughts. Joke 2. Somewhere there's a rule that says, if you must be dramatic, please do so at a volume appropriate to a teapot. Historians still argue whether formal, silent hours in the harem were codified, posted and enforced, or were customary, kept by habit, nudged by the Valid's example and the Kisler Aga's eyebrows. They also debate the timeline of coffee inside women's quarters, whether the harem embraced it early alongside men's coffee culture or adopted it more cautiously as jurists frowned at rowdy coffee houses. The record sprinkles clues, gift registers of finely worked fincans, cups, references to evening coffee service before poetry recitations, but the stern chart you want refuses to sit for its portrait. Prayer times lock the day in like dovetails. Maghrib turns kitchens into orchestras. Iftar in Ramazan brings out platters that taste like relief: dates, simit, lentil soup, fried pastries, and the particular sweetness of gullik, those milk-softened wafers that pretend to be snow. Lanterns grow brave. Balconies grow audiences. A duet of muezzins finds your chest and sets it to rights. Later, suhoor, night's last bite, moves like a secret: egg, cheese, bread, tea, designed to carry a body kindly into the day's long patience. In ordinary months, Isha and bedtime trays, warm milk with a stubborn hint of mastic, a bit of stewed fruit, a sesame biscuit, fold the evening closed. Mainstream fact returns wearing a festival sash. On the 10th of Muharram, the harem, like the city, cooked ashur, a sweet porridge of grains, pulses, nuts, and fruit, ladled into bowls for distribution to staff, neighbors, and the poor. An edible legend of Noah's stew and a policy of sharing that tied palace to street. Registers list ashur ingredients by the load, and the Helvahanes accounts for sugar and spices give historians happy headaches. The rhythm has its unglamorous heroes. Water carriers with shoulders like punctuation marks, charcoal men who know the moods of ash, tasters who risk a spoon to protect a room, laundresses who turn aprons back into aprons. A tea boy learns to move without making steam look anxious. A coffee mistress times the foam as if it were a festival in miniature. Her cups arrive like small decisions everyone agrees with. You see again how usefulness is the surest rank, how a woman who can keep 6 trays punctual could negotiate a border if somebody would only trust her with a map. Between bites, the Valid's office counts. Stipend day aligns with kitchen accounts. The Hazaneater USTA initials purchases for flour and lamb and lemons. Small sums for bay leaves and soaps slide across the desk like shy fish. Ledgers show pious endowments paying for soup at public kitchens. The harem sends leftovers to the poorhouse with clean spoons and no sermons. The household believes in being the kind of boring that comes with receipts. Here, too, discipline tastes like civility. A woman late to her tray might lose a seated place for a week. A steward sloppy with portions might find himself counting beans in the storeroom until he remembers why numbers have edges. No shouting, predictability does the scolding. You think of our keys, our bath clogs, our sugar letter drills. This, too, is a tool, mealtimes as social glue. You ask about food taboos and preferences, and the kitchen answers in menus, not manifestos. Lenten Fridays for Christian servants earn a tray without meat. Ramazan flips the day like a coin. Pregnancy sends for tamarind when lemon won't do. Fever calls for barley water and chicken broth in bowls that know how to be light. A physician leaves notes like recipes for patients. Nothing is absolute, except the desire not to make the room tired. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some senior women carried a tiny spice box, clove, sumac, nigella, to be pinched at the moment of serving. For sparkle, which is also what they offered to conversations. And yes, the Helvehane kept rose jam that could make an afternoon change its mind. Joke 3 peeks out from a tray's underside. A novice asks how to tell if the pilaf is right, and the kitchen mistress says, "If the spoon stands politely for a second and then chooses to lie down, you may proceed." By late evening, quiet has earned its capital letter. Lamps are trimmed. The golden road softens into a lane made for slippers. Trays return like moons coming home. Somewhere a sherbet catches the last cold from the icehouse. Somewhere a child forgets a whole alphabet in sleep. Somewhere the Kisler Aga listens for that favorite palace sound, nothing, on time. You drink a final mouthful of water that remembers marble and a story. And you realize that in this house, rest is not the absence of work. It is the work well scheduled. You step back toward the corridor, and the fountains recalibrate your pulse. The day has tasted like order and civility, and you suspect that is why the palace has survived so many kinds of weather. Tomorrow will bring healers and their rosewater, discipline that fits inside a ledger, mothers whose shadows are merciful. Tonight the last tray closes a small door inside your chest and leaves the latch where you can find it. The kitchen's cool, the prayers keep their hours. The palace remembers how to be quiet without becoming empty. You turn the corner, and the palace lowers its voice to the pitch of breathing. Bowls, not banners, sit on the shelves here. The air smells of rosewater that has learned how to comfort without bragging. This is where worry goes to be folded, where fevers are coaxed toward the door, bruises are persuaded to remember they are temporary, and new life arrives with midwives who move like people who know where the towels are. In a house famous for silk, the most precious fabric is gauze. A midwife, Ebe, ties her sash and shows you the room as if it were a recipe. Clean linens warmed on a rack, a low mongo with coals that behave, a copper basin for water that's been boiled until it stops having opinions, olive oil for small emergencies, swaddling cloths folded into triangles like quiet geometry. When birth is near, she calls for dates to sweeten a tiring mouth and tamarind or lemon water for thirst. She hums, not because magic lives in tunes, but because rhythm turns fear into tasks. Breathe here, pause there, now listen. The Valide's messenger waits outside with dignity, because even dispatches bow to labor. Mainstream fact, placed as calmly as a hand on a shoulder, the Ottoman court employed palace midwives and physicians, the Hekembasi, chief physician, heading the medical establishment, with surgeons, Sarah, oculists, keyhole, and pharmacists, Adder, supplying knowledge and remedies. Childbirth within elite households was overseen by experienced midwives, with ritual observances and postpartum care that included logusa sebeti, a scarlet, spice syrup, visits to the hammam when safe, and the familiar 40-day choreography of rest called Kirk. The paperwork is drowsily precise. Lists of linens issued, spices purchased, thank you gifts recorded in the margins like sighs. When fever prowls, the room becomes a cloud workshop. Rosewater compresses are folded and refolded with the patience of weather. Vinegar sponges visit wrists and ankles. A physician counts pulses with 3 fingers that know more adjectives than most poems. He asks small questions, thirst, appetite, dreams, because bodies tell stories in adverbs. If cough lingers, the mortar gets to work. Licorice shaved into obedient curls, quince syrup for throats that forgot how to be kind, a barley water that tastes like the color of linen. Joke 1. One physician swears by air and order, another by quince and quiet. And you suspect they are the same prescription with different handwriting. You notice an herbal cabinet that could double as a map. Nigella, black seed, winks like pepper and insists it is useful. Sumac waits to turn into a gargle. Mastic sits and beads like frozen rain. Saffron hides under a cloth because gold pretends to be shy. Clove stands guard for toothaches that picked the wrong house. Camphor minding it's cool. Almond oil trying to remember every joint's birthday. The adder from the bazaar brings new stock with a ledger smile, and the Hazen-eater USTA signs for it, because even remedies answer to receipts. Historians still argue whether the balance of power in palace medicine tilted more toward learned Galenic physicians, with their humors, diets, and careful Latinate logic, or toward women's practical networks, midwives, nurses, and older Calphus whose knowledge ran on the rails of experience and recipe books. They also argue how much Jewish, Greek, Armenian, and Arab practitioners braided their techniques with Ottoman norms, and whether the palace's medicine was cosmopolitan by design or simply pragmatic. Your bedtime answer admires the braid. The fever doesn't care which library the cure came from. On a shelf sits a small urinal flask, pear-shaped glass that turns urine into a conversation about color, sediment, foam. The physician raises it to the light, and the light does most of the talk. He is not a wizard. He is a pattern reader, and the palace trusts patterns. If the diagnosis whispers plague, the plan speaks softly too. Move children to the stone baths. They do not burn and are easy to scrub. Thin the crowding in rooms. Burn juniper and vinegar rags. Quarantine doorways with the Kisler Aga's quiet authority. In later centuries, quarantina gets a more official flavor in the empire. Earlier, households practice a domestic version: space, air, patience, prayer. Joke 2. The fountain in the courtyard, sworn to discretion, swears louder during plague years so conversations lose courage and go home. Then there is the needle you have heard rumors about. A senior woman unfolds the story that traveled to London and back, smallpox, seasick, visits too often. Clever hands fight it with variolation, ACI, by introducing a controlled scratch of matter from a mild case into the skin of a healthy person so the illness is tamed into a shield. Mainstream fact, set down with the glow of a lantern held steady. In the early 18th century, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, living in Istanbul, described and praised Ottoman variolation practices, arranging for her own child to be inoculated and later advocating the method in England. She credited older women inoculators who worked with needles and nutshells of dried matter, choosing cool seasons and healthy candidates. The palace, like the city, weighed the risks and, at times, chose a small, managed dare to avoid a large, unmanaged gamble. Historians still argue whether variolation in Ottoman lands was widespread across classes or clustered in urban centers, whether physicians endorsed it or tolerated it as a women-run craft, whether outcomes were as favorable as admiring visitors reported or whether survivorship bias sweetened the tale. The archive coughs up letters, reports, sermons, and silences. Your room tonight offers a human summary. Mothers count scars as insurance. Officials count outbreaks as budgets. Both want fewer funerals. Between crises, medicine is housekeeping. A bruise earns arnica's cousin in the Ottoman pharmacopoeia. They might call it za'atar or reach for a vinegar salt paste. Insomnia earns warm milk with mastic. Stomach storms meet mint, cumin, and anise steeped into something that sounds like a lullaby. Earaches meet warm olive oil with a confidence that suggests grandmother's votes counted. Eye strain, too much embroidery for too long, gets rosewater pads under a lattice where shade is the medicine. The Harem you loved yesterday reappears as a clinic, steam for the chest, keys for sluggish skin, then a nap earned by heat's grammar. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Palace kits included ear spoons, tongue scrapers, and coal sticks tucked into chatelaines. The last doubled as both cosmetic and eye wash carrier. Antimony-based coal had a reputation, contested now, trusted then, for protecting eyes in glary summers. In winter, quince seeds were soaked to make a mucilage painted lightly on throats against cracks from recitation and cold. The effect was equal parts pharmacy and psychology. To be tended is to be taught calm. The Valide's ledger enters again like a nurse who knows when to smile. Stipends for midwives, payments to physicians, purchases of sugar and spice earmarked as medicine, alms sent to neighborhood clinics. Line after line of care turned into numbers so tomorrow can be cared for too. On the festival of Ashur, the kitchen ladles a little extra toward the sick rooms. During Ramazan, the suhoor tray for those who must take remedies during daylight is arranged with permissions tucked into its napkin. Exceptions are part of kindness. Discipline lives here, but it prefers good habits to sharp words. A nurse late to her rounds loses a privilege, not her dignity. A novice who forgets to boil water learns it the slow way, standing with a tutor watching bubbles until she can predict them. Records exist not to punish but to prevent. A column titled, "Return to Health," makes better reading than any sermon. Joke 3. The shelf labeled Miracles is empty, on purpose, and the shelf labeled Clean Towels is always full. You ask whether amulets and prayers sit comfortably with ointments and ointments with quarantine, and the room answers by nodding. A triangle of paper with a verse rides in a sleeve. A theriac, that old pan-Mediterranean compound, sits in a jar like a grandfather who refuses to retire. A physician washes hands with soap that smells faintly of bay. A midwife murmurs a blessing while checking a pulse. The world inside the harem is not a laboratory, it is a house, and houses use every tool that doesn't harm. Mainstream fact returns with a hat tip to a very old book. Ottoman medicine also knew its classics. Translations and commentaries on Ibn Sina, Avicenna, surgical notes downstream of Serafeddin Sabunkwigli's illustrated manual, dispensatories that read like grocery lists with Latin accents. Later, in the 19th century, modern hospitals and quarantine boards arrive with uniforms and stamps. Your corridor sits between those eras, content to practice competent kindness and let later centuries argue about institutions. By the time you stand, the rosewater has turned the air into something you could sleep on. You have watched fear become procedure, pain become manageable, and prevention become a custom people can plan around. Somewhere a child with a small needle scar on the upper arm is learning to walk. Somewhere a jar of quince syrup thinks noble thoughts about throats. Somewhere a physician is writing a note that says simply, "Better." The palace prefers this kind of miracle, the kind that looks like work. You step back into the corridor and the fountains resume their soft counsel. After medicine comes order, the kind our next room keeps in ledgers instead of bandages. But you carry this hour with you like cool cloth. In a building that survives by being predictable, healers teach the most restful discipline of all, to meet trouble with measured hands and to write yesterday's wound under a heading titled, "No longer urgent." You follow the golden road until it becomes a ledger written in tile. The air is the same rose linen you've come to trust, but the voices take on the grammar of kindly no. Every household that lasts learns this room, the one where rules are kept on paper so tempers don't try improvisation. Here discipline wears slippers, carries a pen, and prefers course corrections to thunder. A Hazaneater USTA sits at a low desk with two ledgers open like twins, stipends on the left, infractions on the right. She taps the page with a fingernail you suspect could balance a tray by itself. "Most of my work," she murmurs, "is reminders. A name, a date, a brief phrase, late to lessons, linen miscount, raised voice in corridor, and beside each, a tidy answer, reassignment, small deduction, 2 weeks laundry duty, apology delivered." The Kisler Aga's discreet signature appears like a quiet drumbeat. The Valide Sultan's seal lands only when necessary, a moon that reminds other stars how to behave. Mainstream fact, set down as evenly as a stamp, in the imperial household discipline was bureaucratized, governed by palace law and custom, canon, tract and registers, and enforced through loss of privilege, reassignment, fines, rank demotion, or transfer to the Eski Saray, Old Palace. Spectacle punishments were rare inside the harem. Order depended on paper trails and gatekeepers more than on public drama. The Old Palace in the Bayezid/Semberlides district, built under Mem II, served as the retirement and holding household for women no longer at the center. Widowed valets when a new sultan ascended, dismissed staff, and those whom policy preferred to keep dignified and elsewhere. You watch the workflow. A Kalfa submits a note. 2 novices whispering after quiet hour, restitution proposed, extra nursery shifts to repay silence. Approved. A steward miscounted bay leaves and soap. He'll shadow the storehouse mistress for a month and surrender his festival day off. Approved. A consort's attendant let a tray outrun a conversation. She loses her front row sideline for Bayram and spends the week with the coffee team, learning timing from phone. Approved. Joke 1. Around here, humiliation is never a tool. Inconvenience is gentle, specific, and very educational. The room keeps a shelf of letters already written, templates with blanks. Your stipend is reduced by ____ Aki for ___ days due to _____. You are reassigned to ____ until _____. Please return the following keys. Keys again, you hear them down the corridor. Because in a household this size, authority is a key ring, and discipline often begins with returning one brass note from the court. A woman who has forgotten her speed hands back a cupboard key for a week and remembers. Historians still argue whether the Eski Saray functioned primarily as dignified retirement, a soft landing with pensions and rooms, or as a quieter exile for those out of favor. They also debate whether palace canon codes spelled out penalties in detail or whether practice, guided by the Valide, the Kisler Aga, and precedent, did the real governing. Your room tonight declines to turn a question into thunder. It notes that both can be true at different hours, and that ledgers keep the line between mercy and policy from smudging. You glimpse the old palace on a map, big, older bones, courtyards that remember other dynasties, rooms where pensions are counted and stories get longer in the telling. Transfer there is not a march, it's a procession of trunks, garments sealed, jewelry inventoried, servants assigned, letters of manumission prepared if marriage out is part of the plan. A woman who leaves for Eski Saray may be on her way to retirement, to marriage with dowry, or simply to a quieter orbit that steadies the center. Even goodbyes are filed. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Some fines are paid in kind, not only in coins but in candles for the mosque lamps or sugar allocated to the Helvahane. The line item reads like a recipe for reforms. Another small custom: when a woman is publicly forgiven, she receives a simple kaftan, not a robe of honor, but a garment whose plainness signals back to work better than speeches. The fabric's messages: let's not make a fuss. You sit in on a listening hour. 2 women stand, hands folded, and a senior USTA, half judge, half aunt, invites each to speak in order. No interrupting. Fountains outside provide the room's soundtrack. One admits a sharp word said when sleep was thin. She offers apology and a tray of assure for the laundry staff. Accepted. Another contests a miscount, and produces a counterledger with a neat calligraphic spine. The Hazaneater USTA smiles. The correction is entered. Trust interest goes up a point. Joke 2. In this building, the fiercest duel is fought between 2 ledgers at a respectful distance. Mainstream fact walks back and holding a vine stick, not to strike, but to remind you where it lived in other rooms. Ottoman discipline for soldiers and pages could be sharp. Within the harem, custodial authority rested with the Kisler Aga and senior women. Records from the imperial treasury and household registers show dock stipends, transfers, rank changes, and pensions, administrative verbs that kept the women's city governed without importing the janissary yard into it. The Valide Sultan's edicts in her neat hand, or a secretary's, appear at the top of tricky pages like a mother's signature on a permission slip the universe must honor. Edge cases visit, because houses are human. What about letters smuggled to the bazaar? No. What about quarrels that recruit cousins and recipes into coalitions? Absolutely not. The Bastanchian eunuchs unclog such drama before it tries to become folklore. The usual penalty is distance. Move the parties apart for a season, assign them to different courtyards, give each a job that wears them pleasantly out. If someone refuses the machinery of calm, the door labeled esquisserie swings with a dignity that feels like weather, not like punishment. The philosophy underneath is so ordinary you almost miss it. Predictability is mercy. It spares everyone from studying faces to know how to behave. It also makes forgiveness a department rather than a mood. A column labeled, restored, does slow, steady business. A column labeled, married out, glides next to it with dowry sums in careful ink. Even banishments, when the rare storm required them, are written as transfers, with dates, escort lists, and an addendum about pensions. Households do not love mystery, they love sleep. Historians still argue whether European travelers exaggerated harem punishments to feed Orientalist appetites, or whether later apologetics sanded off harsher edges too eagerly. They quarrel over anecdotes about Saxe and the Bosphorus, over satire that pretended to be reporting, over court chronicles that often preferred discretion to detail. Your careful middle chair tonight refuses both extremes and follows the paper crumbs. We have names, sums, dates, and doors. They describe a discipline that, most of the time, organized consequences rather than staged them. You watch a young Kalfa receive a note, a half stipend for 2 months after a second late arrival to lessons. She bows, accepts, and is immediately assigned as timekeeper for the novices' hallway, a practice as old as ship bells. People learn punctuality by guarding someone else's clock. She tucks the note into her sash with the same care she'd give a poem, because around here paper changes the weather. Joke 3 arrives, balancing a tray. A novice asks how to avoid the discipline room. And the USTA smiles. Know where your towel is, where your key is, and where your mouth isn't. It lands like a proverb and makes 3 women laugh into their sleeves. Before you leave, the Hazeneater USTA closes the ledger gently, as if not to wake the columns. We try to return people to usefulness, she says, and when that isn't possible, we return them to quiet. You think of the Hammam and its Gobektasi, the kitchens and their schedules, the eunuchs and their soft lamps, the Valide and her shadow of receipts. Discipline, in this house, is simply the broom that keeps those rooms from collecting the kind of dust that tells bad stories. When you step back onto the golden road, a junior eunuch is dimming a lamp by pinching the wick with wet fingers. Not a drama, just a procedure learned from someone who learned it from someone else. The corridor resumes its lullaby. Somewhere a transfer letter is being folded around a small pension, somewhere a forgiveness caftan is being hemmed plain, and somewhere a woman who forgot her speed is counting wash basins until she remembers it again. The house breathes. The ledgers sleep. And you, who came here expecting thunder, find yourself respecting paper for being more restful than any speech. You step into rooms where quiet has a signature. The carpets remember every procession, the tiles keep confidences, and on a low table lies the most powerful object in the building that isn't a key, the Valide Sultan's ledger, bound in velvet the color of ripened pomegranates. You have met stewards and tutors, eunuchs and mistresses of storerooms. Now you meet the gravity that makes their orbits hold. The Valide Sultan, mother of the reigning sultan, sits where family becomes policy without raising its voice. Her suite is a small chancery in slippers. A secretary reads stipends the way a muezzin reads sky, A Hasan-eater USTA slides silk purses as if they were commas. The Kisler Aga stands within nod breadth, carrying petitions with a pen tucked into his sash like a quiet dagger of ink. The Valide listens with a stillness you recognize from the baths, that hush that turns steam into counsel. In this house, money is a lullaby when counted well, and she keeps time. Mainstream fact, set down with the firmness of a seal. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the Valide Sultan was the Harem's supreme authority and a major political actor. Kozum's Sultan served as Valide to Murad IV, who ascended at age 11, and to Ibrahim, acting as regent for years early in Murad's reign. Later Turhan Hadasi Sultan, Valide to Mem IV, exerted power as regent and patron, completing the Yeni Valide Mosque complex at Eminonu, with the Spice Bazaar, in the 1660s and backing strong grand viziers to steady the realm. The titles are family words. The work is government. Watch how stipends move. The Valide's ledger lists mevasib for women by rank, bayramlik gifts, dowry parcels for marriages, alms for widows and students, and vakif disbursements for fountains, schools, soup kitchens. A line for oil so lamps keep behaving. A line for sugar-marked medicine, because the sick forget sweetness. A line for copyists who turn piety into documents. She signs with a seal that could double as weather. When it falls, corridors change climate. Joke 1. Somewhere in these pages a whole argument has been replaced by the word paid. You attend a petition hour that feels like embroidery work from the back. A Kalfa asks for thread money to finish curtain repairs before Ramazan. Approved, with a nudge to buy indigo because it forgives dust. A physician requests 2 apprentices. Approved, but tagged to the library payroll. They will copy recipes when not learning pulses. A provincial judge's wife sends a letter asking dowry help for an orphan girl in her quarter. Granted from the Valide's private alms with a note to the Kisler Aga. Have someone check the roof where she lives. Power here leaves receipts and roof repairs. Historians still argue whether the Sultanate of Women, roughly mid-16th to mid-17th century, was a distinct constitutional phase or simply exceptional personalities using ordinary levers, patronage, proximity, regency when heirs were minors. They debate whether Kozum's regency stabilized or stifled reform, whether Turhan's alliance with the Kapila viziers was vision or necessity, whether the Valide's influence leaned more on household endowments or palace access. Your bedtime middle holds both. When a child sits on the throne, mothers become hinges, and hinges are suddenly the most important part of a door. The Valide also keeps the marriage map. Not the Sultans. Those decisions sit in another room, but the marrying out of women who have served well. Dowries are carefully built, a decent kaftan chest, some silver, linens numbered in the ledger's neat hand, a small cash cushion so new kitchens don't wobble. Husbands are often officials, scribes, officers, judges, whose loyalty to the palace deepens when their homes are woven to it by thread and stipend. The city feels these choices as a tremor of competence. A district gets a bookish new household. A clinic gains a volunteer with palace habits. A mosque's lamps burn more steadily. Joke 2. The Valide chooses husbands the way she chooses wardrobe braid. Nothing that unravels on a Tuesday. Her patronage reaches past curtains into stone. Endowments, vakif, in her name fund fountains that rinse dust off city tongues, schools that measure letters into children, soup kitchens that teach broth to multiply, and Quran recitations that turn air into architecture. The Yeni Valide complex at Eminonu becomes a thesis you can walk through: mosque, market, the Mazur Karsisi, schools, fountains, a network where piety and commerce shake hands. Mainstream fact again, in stone. Turhan Hadasi completed the long-halted Yeni Mosque project, begun under Safavi Sultan decades earlier, opening it in the 1660s and endowing the Spice Bazaar to fund its upkeep. Registers trace rents to lamps and salaries like a river that knows its banks. In the shadow her seal creates, politics follows slippered laws. A grand vizier rises because the Valide trusts his ledgers more than his speeches. Another is eased out because his timing scuffs ceremonies. She does not command janissaries, she commands access. Who speaks when, whose petition becomes a meeting, which letter crosses the gate of felicity today and which waits until a child's fever is down. She works time the way others work steel. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Stipend day brings out tiny silk purses stamped with a tugra and a scent, a drop of amber or rose, so that wages smell like belonging. In the Valide's office, a cat with excellent references is allowed to nap on the warm ledger box because mice hate policy. And on Harem, the Valide's attendants lay a narrow carpet along the golden road not for pomp but to muffle coins as they slide into waiting hands. Generosity works better without echo. You ask how she speaks to danger. The answer is placement. A restless faction in one barracks? She backs a vizier who can budget calmly and moves 2 marriages so gossip loses its bridge. A fire in the kitchens? Her messenger goes first to the nursery, second to the bath's marble rooms, third to the storerooms for ledgers. A rumor about the succession? She schedules a procession and makes sure the city sees a healthy prince and a stable calendar. The old maxim returns in silk: predictability is mercy. Historians still argue whether Cosum's end, her murder in 1651 amid conflict with Turhan's circle, signals a turning of the age or simply the palace's least restful page left open too long. Accounts dispute details. Chronicles choose angles. Later storytellers pick adjectives. Your sleep-friendly ledger reduces the storm to a sentence about risk. Power inside a family palace is proximate, therefore fragile. The house learned, painfully, to keep edges blunt and roles written. The Valide's daily desk is prosaic on purpose. She reviews school rosters. One girl moves from laundry to letters. Her arithmetic keeps escaping its lines. Initials medicine purchases. More quince, less bravado. Authorizes library copies. Pay the scribe. He feeds 7 with his pen, and writes a note to the Kisler Aga. This winter, extra charcoal for the widows in Uskadar. Send by the fountain we endowed last year. If politics is thunder, this is roofing. Joke 3. You realize half of ruling is reminding water where to go. She also mediates. 2 ministries knock into each other in the world outside. Inside, she invites their wives to tea and a poetry reading behind screens. Seating is not an accident. The cups arrive in an order that turns rivalry into parallel lines. A promise of assure for a neighborhood kitchen is extracted gently. When the women leave, their households will have new instructions they think they thought of themselves. The Valide's soft power is simply housekeeping with a city-sized broom. Mainstream fact returns, wearing the ink stains of reality. Valide's sultans issued written orders, sometimes countersigned by secretaries, corresponded with governors and scholars, and intervened in appointments and budgets. Their names appear on vakif deeds and treasury registers. Some, like Cosum and Turhan, acted as regents when sultans were minors, guiding counsel through intermediaries. Others kept nearer to household management yet still colored policy through patronage and access. Beneath the ledgers lives a theology of ordinary. The Valide knows that children grow when days repeat, that cities eat when markets open at the same hour, that piety lasts when it's poured into fountains you can lean on in August. Her shadow is not a threat, it's shade. Women bring their worries to that cooler air and leave with tasks: a dowry to assemble, a tutor to hire, a cousin to forgive, a ledger to balance. You notice, finally, her keys, fewer than the Kisler Aga's, but heavier for being symbolic. One to the private treasury, one to the vakif chest, one to the letter cabinet, and one, this is the only ornament on her belt, to the nursery. It looks like a toy until you see her hand on it as a messenger whispers about a cough. Authority in this suite is a mother's reflex written into marble. By the time you stand to leave, you've watched grand strategy disappear into small procedures, coins into purses, purses into hands, hands into chores that feed a city. The valet closes the ledger softly, the way you close a door that knows where the children are sleeping. Outside, the golden road waits like a vein. You understand now why our earlier rooms, ladders, lessons, baths, kitchens, discipline, all bend toward this one, a mother with a velvet ledger keeping the palace on tempo so the empire can hum. You hear politics before you see it, the sound of slippers finding the most courteous speed a tile can allow, the clink of a sherbet spoon against a cup, the whisper of paper that knows it is important but refuses to rustle. If council chambers outside the harem speak in drums and trumpets, this corridor prefers strings. Gifts cross thresholds, petitions queue behind screens, and alliances are braided the way hair is, gently, with pins that don't show unless you know where to look. You step into a small salon where trays do diplomatic work. On them, a length of bursa silk folded like a sentence, a porcelain cup whose glaze learned modesty, a jar of rose jam wearing a ribbon the color of pomegranate seeds. A kalfa notes each item in a register because even generosity here must balance sender, purpose, recipient, and where the thank yous should travel next. Joke 1. The palace maintains that if your gratitude cannot fit on a tray, it probably belongs in a warehouse, where a clerk will discover it and send it back with a polite note. The Kisler Aga enters as punctuation, thin divot, pen case, in his sash, seals in a pouch that behaves like a weather system. He collects arzuls, folded petitions, from servants, tutors, guild representatives' wives, even from women beyond the palace whose letters came attached to alms receipts and recommendations. He carries them through the gate of felicity to be tucked into the day's stack for the sovereign or to the Grand Vizier. But often the first reading happens here, in slippers, where a line can be whispered to the valet sultan or a senior consort who understands which thread to pull so the fabric tightens instead of tearing. Mainstream fact, written as steadily as a ledger. Harem women, especially the valet sultan and chief consorts like Harem, Safai, Kozum, and Turhan, participated in patronage networks, receiving and sending gifts, forwarding petitions, influencing appointments to posts from judgeships to provincial governorships through access and vakif patronage. European embassies cultivated ties with the women's household. Letters and gifts survive, and the Kisler Aga mediated an enormous traffic of messages and endowment funds, including the Hermine, Mecca, Medina, endowments. This is not scandal. It is logistics. Scented and sealed. A woman from the Weavers' Guild in the city sends silk lengths with a note about prices. A judge's wife submits a petition for a school stipend in a flood-prone quarter. The chief midwife asks for soap and sheets for an expected winter of babies. Each is paired with a reply, an endorsement to the Grand Vizier, a vakif allocation ordered from the valet's purse, a quiet reminder to the steward of the Helvehane about sugar-marked medicine. Nothing lands loudly. Decisions settle like dust that has learned manners. Historians still argue whether this slippered politics amounted to systematic power, a parallel bureaucracy of women and eunuchs, or a series of personal circuits, brilliant only when a few exceptional figures were present. They also argue about foreign reports. Did Venetian Bailey and English merchants exaggerate the harem's leverage to flatter their informants, or understate it to keep credit for their own successes? Your middle-of-the-night verdict lets the paper trail lead. Gift registers, vakif deeds, letters with seals say that influence here was habitual, even when headlines outside preferred cavalry. The choreography has rules. Gifts do not cross rank without explanations. Petitions travel up through the Kisler Aga, across to the valet's desk, and only then out to the vizier. Responses return the way water does, taking the lowest polite path. A good USTA can plot 3 appointments with 2 sherbets and a seating chart. A bad one can tangle a weak. The building encourages the former with templates, model letters, lists of approved phrases, even phrasebooks for compliments that oil hinges without promising kingdoms. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. When Safi Sultan corresponded with Elizabeth I, perfumed gloves and clocks sometimes crossed as gifts. Court gossips swore one clock ticked the eason wrong and made the cat distrust the mantle for a week. Whether or not that story is true, it captures the texture of these exchanges. Objects that behave as messages, and messages wrapped as perfume. A small reception begins. Women from a provincial official's household, veiled, letter in hand, are admitted to a screened gallery. Coffee arrives in cups that do not slosh because their bearer has learned time signatures. The letter praises a local judge and requests that his promotion not strand the school he funds. The valet listens, asks 2 questions an outsider would not think to ask, about roof tiles and bread prices, and sends the petition on with a note. If moved, transfer half his vacant obligations to the market rents we hold there. No decree, no speech, just plumbing for goodwill. Mainstream fact returns wearing accounts inc. Muhim Defterleri, registers of important affairs, and Vakif records often reflect recommendations originating in or passing through the women's household. Harem's letters to foreign courts, Kozum's interventions in appointments during regency, and Turhan's patronage of the Yeni Valide complex show a repeatable pattern. Gifts, petitions, appointments, funding, or timing adjusted. The nouns are plain, the verbs are soft. This salon also enforces ceilings. A petition that tries to purchase what should be judgment earns a delay. One that injures a rival is sent back with a proverb about bridges. One that smells like self-promotion more than public good is smothered under hospitality until it forgets why it came. Joke 2, the unofficial rule reads, if your gift needs a mule, your request needs a no. Alliances are sewn, not hammered. A marriage you learned about in the valide's ledger doubles as a political stitch. A reliable Kalfa becomes the wife of a scribe in a chancery that needs the harem's habits. A widow with palace training marries a judge headed to a border town, carrying with her a palette for order that will improve a courtroom's manners. A dowry chest can be a policy memo, written in linen and patience. Historians still argue whether these marriages out were empowering placements or soft controls, extending palace reach into households across the city and empire. They count dowries, red letters, map kinship, and disagree amiably in journals with long footnotes. Your corridor answer watches the outcomes: lamp oil paid on time, schools that do not lose chalk, fountains repaired before July. You notice how timing does half the work. A petition to move a governor waits until Ramazan, when processions make the city patient. A request for repairs flies before winter so roofs don't complain in chorus. A touchy appointment goes through when the Grand Vizier and the valide's private almoner are both in a good week, which is to say the kitchens are happy and the nursery is sleeping. Mood is not policy, but sleep is. The gift economy speaks in materials. Silver that can be melted into salaries. Cloth that can be cut into caftans. Books that can be copied for a library you endowed in Uskadar. A rosary whose beads know how to keep a hand from hurrying. When an ambassador sends something useless, it becomes a lesson about the difference between shining and helping. The inventory clerk can tell you which embassies learned quickly. Quirky tidbit number 2. On Bahram, a few discreet favored petitioners received sherbet in cups with tiny paper tags rolled under the saucer, 1 word each. Seen later, granted, ask library. The code kept trays from becoming town criers. The paper smelled faintly of clove, which meant the message would linger in the pocket where it belonged. Mainstream fact again, nodding toward the city. The Spice Bazaar's rents funded the Yeni Mosque complex. Endowment deeds name women patrons whose seals reappear in court registers approving appointments to imarets, soup kitchens, and schools. The Bastanchi reported courtyard order not only to the Grand Vizier but via the Kisler Aga to the Valide when festivals and petitions overlapped. It is an ecosystem. Markets feed mosques, mosques feed kitchens, kitchens feed schools, schools feed letters, and letters come back here in slippers. Joke 3 wanders in wearing a ribbon. A nervous petitioner asks how to make a request. Impossible to refuse. And the USTA smiles. Make it useful. Nothing scented lasts if it isn't helpful. By late afternoon the salon has exhaled. Trays return to the Helvehane with their pride intact. The register closes like a book that knows there will be a sequel tomorrow. The Kisler Aga tucks his last seal away and goes to listen for silence in a nursery corridor. You stand and feel the truth of this room settle on your shoulders. Politics in slippers is not a euphemism. It is a method. It turns requests into chores, compliments into maintenance, alliances into calendars. Outside, policy may gallop. Here, it arrives on time. You step back onto the golden road and watch a shaft of light move one tile to the left. Somewhere a fountain signs a discreet approval. Somewhere a cat naps on the Valide's ledger box. Somewhere a petition learns the difference between wanting and needing. The harem doesn't overthrow, it influences. It doesn't shout, it hosts. It doesn't hoard, it allocates. And tonight, as lamps find their wicks and the kitchens remember dessert, the city beyond these screens will feel decisions it never saw. Because a tray moved, a seal nodded, and a sentence of kindly yes found the shortest, softest path to the place it could do good. You arrive at a door that smells faintly of cedar and decisions. Inside, trunks behave like paragraphs, each one a statement about a woman's future. Linens folded to the dimensions of hope, silver that understands interest, a caftan whose cuffs know how to reassure a new household. This is the room where marriage and manumission are organized, the palace's way of turning years of service into orbits that continue outside these screens without wobbling. You have seen stipends, schooling, discipline, patronage. Now you watch a different form of permission, the one that says, "Go, with our name tucked into your pocket like a steadying hand." The paperwork comes first. On the low table sits an Azad name, a manumission deed, already written in a hand that never hurries. A name, the one she uses now, a former name, the one folded like a letter from a childhood river, a line establishing free status, a line preserving honor, a line about dowry and pension. The Hazaneater USTA checks entries with a needle-fine reed pen, the Kisler Aga initials where keys change owners. The Valide Sultan's seal waits in a small dish, its wax warm and reasonable. When the seal falls, a life becomes portable. Mainstream fact, set down as matter-of-factly as a dowry list. By the 16th and 17th centuries, Ottoman sultans largely ceased marrying foreign princesses and drew consorts from within the harem. Women who did not remain in the sovereign's immediate orbit were often manumitted and married out to officials, scribes, judges, cadi, provincial governors, beyler bey. Military men, with dowries assembled from the palace treasury. Registers and endowment deeds preserve manumission formulas, dowry amounts, and pensions, showing that leaving the harem frequently meant entering the city as a patron rather than as a roomer. You sit with a woman whose quiet competence has built half the routines you now trust. Today her tray is a trunk. 2 antari, 2 caftans, a winter ferris, 3 sets of linen, a little silver, a rosary whose beads already know where to rest, and a purse of coins heavy enough to slow a pocket without burdening a step. The marriage contract, Nika, will be read in a salon where sherbet tastes like relief. The groom is a scribe in a chancery whose ledgers will improve the moment her habits arrive. His mother counts lamp oil wisely, which the Valide considers a sacrament. Joke 1. The palace's matchmaking rule might as well read, "Pair competence with receipts and let the household sing." The marriage map isn't random. It's a network diagram with a human pulse. Some women remain in Istanbul, stitching palace manners into courts, schools, and markets. Others travel to Edirne, Bursa, Damascus, Cairo, or a frontier town where what the city calls routine is called miracle. A woman who can time a coffee foam, count a storeroom, and speak without fraying becomes exactly the kind of person a province needs. The VACIF system, you remember, allows charity to travel. Now you watch people do the same work. Historians still argue whether these marriages out were primarily empowering placements, a form of social mobility with stipends and respect, or primarily levers for extending the palace's influence into bureaucracies and provinces. They had columns, dowry amounts, ranks of husbands, letters that followed. Your sleepy middle path records their verbs, teach, organize, fund, steady, and notices that whatever the intention, the result often looked like competence exported. Before the sherbet, a henna evening, Kina Jessasai, softens the edges of farewell. Hands turn auburn under songs that know how to kiss the threshold. Women who taught her letters and ledgers now teach her jokes for living with in-laws. A tray of candles makes a little procession across the room. Lace and laughter swap places gracefully. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Palace dowry trunks sometimes carried a tiny brass scale for weighing coins on the wedding day. Trust is pious, but measures are holy, and a clove sachet stitched into a hem. So words will smell sweet. Somewhere a cat circles the trunk twice for luck and is immediately added to the oral statute book. Joke 2. The only omen the Valide acknowledges is a receipt without arithmetic mistakes. The manumission itself is as calm as a well-made bed. A short prayer, the seal, the deed handed with both hands, and a phrase that has closed many chapters. You are free and honored among us. If the husband is already present, the Nika follows with witnesses whose habit is to remember details. If the wedding is set for another day, the bride's pension note is tucked into the ledger. The old palace stands ready as a transit house if timing or distance requires patience. Outside storytellers prefer hydra-headed drama. The palace prefers timelines. Mainstream fact returns in family grammar. Women who bore princes, as Haseki or later Kaden Effendi, rarely married out until politics made it prudent, and even then with gravity. Women who did not remain central were manumitted after years of service and often received pensions that followed them into marriage or retirement. The Eski Saray housed widowed valids during transitions and many retired women, a quieter city where stipends and stories arrived on schedule. You ask how a woman chooses marriage, retirement, or remaining within as a senior USTA. The answer is a conversation more than a decree. The Valide, the Kisler Aga, a trusted USTA, and the woman herself read timing together. Is her health telling her to claim afternoons of sunlight and embroidery? Does a dowry place now build a bridge the city needs? Would her talents serve the palace longer if anchored here? The only wrong choice is the one made in a hurry. Joke 3. In this house, even yes and no stop for tea. A marriage day dawns like a well-behaved festival. Clothes remember their grammar. Trays arrive as if they had always been there, and the imam's voice curls around vows as lightly as steam around a kettle. The bride's veil is not a curtain, it is a comma between chapters. Gifts glide across a carpet that muffles coins so generosity doesn't show off. The Kisler Aga escorts the couple to the gate that knows how to say goodbye. Outside, the Bostanchi set the pace to the door of a new house where a lamp already waits, wicked and trimmed. There is, of course, a stack of contrary stories tall enough to keep historians friendly and awake. A bride who missed the city and returned to the old palace within a year. A husband who discovered that a wife trained by the harem's ledgers could smell lazy accounts at 50 paces. A dowry chest that got lost on the way to Uskadar and was retrieved by a eunuch who claimed he had simply followed the clove. Historians still argue whether such tales are exceptions that prove a norm or norms poorly disguised by polite writing. The ledgers jerk their chins toward the column labeled ongoing pension and ask to be believed. The legal texture matters. A manumitted woman enters marriage as a free Muslim with rights and property, inheritance, as specified by Islamic law, and dower, mahr. The Azad name ensures that former status won't be used against her in court. The Nikah ensures that current status is respected by in-laws who may have strong opinions and weaker math. Women trained here do not misplace contracts. The palace has made of them not only wives but clients of the law who know how to make ink behave. Sometimes manumission isn't a preface to marriage, it is the chapter itself. A senior USTA asks for her freedom and a small suite in the old palace, a pension, a corner garden, and visiting nieces who bring market gossip. She copies books for a Vakif library, keeps a cat whose references are excellent, and teaches calligraphy to girls whose hands will one day sign dowry lists. Freedom here is not only movement, it is tempo chosen by one's own pulse. Quirky tidbit number 2. The day after a wedding, women send the bride a morning tray balkamac, honey and clotted cream, sesame rings, and a small mirror wrapped in cloth with a proverb pinned to it. Let your house reflect light, not noise. Mirrors are both gift and memo. They remind a new household to practice the palace's favorite art, composure. Before you leave, you watch a letter addressed to a far province slip under a seal. We commend to you Aish, newly manumitted, newly wed, whose service has made our corridors predictable and our ledgers legible. Treat her justice as policy. The letter travels with a copy of her deed and a list of items in her trunk so no one can pretend to forget. That, more than anything, is the palace's protection, paper that walks with you. You step back onto the golden road and notice how the corridor widens for goodbyes. The air tastes faintly of clove and a story choosing its next paragraph. Somewhere a trunk clicks shut like a polite promise. Somewhere the valide seal cools. Somewhere a young woman practices the pace of her new street and realizes she already knows it. Food on time, ledgers honest, words measured. In a world that prefers noise, the harem's parting gift is boring durability. It is the kind of blessing that lets cities sleep. You take a turn that even the golden road treats with courtesy, and the light thins into a honeycomb hush. A door with a lattice-like patient handwriting opens one width of a palm, then another, then just enough for you to learn the palace's most difficult lullaby. The rooms for princes, the caves, the cage, people call it, though in stone it feels less like bars and more like careful parentheses placed around futures the empire is not ready to spend. You step in, and the air smells of ink, felt, and the soft powder of archery targets that have learned to keep secrets. A boy sits with a reed pen so steady you want to bring him a trumpet just to prove he is still a child. He writes Bismillah in a hand a tutor would put in his pocket if manners allowed. On a low rack wait the tools of a contained education, copybooks for Arabic and Persian, a bow scaled for a room, a Morocco album whose pages sew verses to painted leaves, a geometry slate chalked and erased until triangles behave. Alala, tutor, moves through the lesson like a cloud that knows where the mountain is, and a eunuch you recognize by the soft lantern pattern on the tiles keeps watch in that guardian way that hears before it sees. Mainstream fact, set down with the gravity of a ledger that has seen too much. From the early 17th century, the Ottoman court largely replaced the brutal custom of fratricide with confinement of princes in the cafes at top copy. Ahmed I is usually credited with ending routine. Fratricide and succession norms tilted toward agnatic seniority, the oldest male of the dynasty, so brothers and uncles could outlive the reigning sultan and later ascend from seclusion. The intent was stability without blood. The consequence, whispered by corridors, was men arriving on the throne with soft indoor shoes. The rooms are not a dungeon, they're a curriculum under supervision. Princes learn recitation, calligraphy, statecraft lore, genealogy, who is whose headache, law and outline, poetry enough to speak without clattering, archery measured to the length of a gallery, and even the etiquette of listening so a council later won't feel like a duel. There is exercise, pace laps along a tiled loop, archery against a padded wall, a mace too heavy for nonsense, and there are quiet sports, chess that teaches horses to move like thoughts, backgammon that makes dice sound reasonable. Joke 1. If you ever want to measure imperial patience, count how many times a prince practices the same bow toward the same empty doorway. You notice the mother's shadows here, less visible than in the valide's office but warmer. A mother arranges tutors who teach without gossip, books that won't hurry a mind into arrogance, meals that arrive before sulk can pretend to be philosophy. Her influence isn't a trumpet, it's a metronome. Keep the boy healthy, literate, composed. Keep his name from becoming a banner for anyone overeager outside. She sends gifts with the Kisler Aga's quiet post, an oud when the winter is long, a scented letter folded so hope smells like clove instead of rumor. The Valide's ledger even here keeps its beat. Stipends for tutors, charcoal allowances for study in January, a budget line for archery straw that reads like a poem about patience. Historians still argue whether the cave's practice saved the dynasty from itself or starved it of the rough wisdom that comes from governing a province and bargaining with weather. Some chronicle inexperience. Sultans like Mustafa I or Ibrahim presented as erratic after long seclusion. Others note competent rulers who studied in rooms like this yet reigned with energy once the door widened. Scholars disagree, in footnotes with excellent manners, about strictness. Did confinement mean near total seclusion, or was it a graduated sequester with supervised outings, lessons, even hunting within palace bounds? Tonight's corridor chooses kindness and keeps the paradox in view. A method that tried to prevent funerals also invited lonely crowns. The boy's routine is as exact as any you've seen. Dawn recitation to make vowels behave. Breakfast plain enough to keep nerves from inventing dragons. Lessons in blocks with short walks between so legs remember they exist. Archery in the warm hour. Nap if a tutor can coax it, some call it. Second study lying down. Music when the light goes gentle. Modes that teach the heart to count. Letters from a grandmother arrive with proverbs disguised as gossip. A lala corrects a flourish on the aleph and calls it victory. The Kisler Aga does the rounds and listens for the sound he loves, pages turning at the right speed. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. The prince's rooms kept songbirds, saran, canaries, saka, goldfinches, not for decoration but for tempo. A tutor swore you could hear a boy's mood in the bird's reply. Too fast, and the lesson needed a walk. Too soft, and supper should come early. Another small theater. Some practice bows carried tiny bells near the grip so a sloppy release tattled. The result was a household where sound policed ego more gently than speeches. The architecture helps. Windows with lattice so the world is present but cannot recruit you. Courtyards that are small on purpose, so a boy learns the size of his responsibilities before he tries to hold a continent. Doors that always open inward. A design that whispers the first rule of rule. Check yourself before you enter a room. Even the bath is sized to the lesson. Heat enough for ease, not for spectacle. Attendants trained to vanish into steam. A Mongol placed where a young mind won't invent a war with its own shadow. Mainstream fact returns with the sober tone of a register. Succession in the 17th century often followed seniority, bringing to the throne uncles or brothers who had not governed provinces. The Kaif's apartments, refurbished under Murad III and Ahmed I, formed a controlled environment where potential heirs were kept safe and, sometimes, anxious. Later reforms and circumstances loosened practices, but the reputation of the Kaif stayed vivid, fed by court tales and travelers' imaginations. The emotional weather in these rooms is humane and odd. A prince studies maps of places he has not smelled. He practices justice on paper before anyone dares give him a courtroom. He learns self-command in a corridor with no enemies. His mother becomes a school of mood, teaching him how to be listened to without becoming loud. The palace tries to furnish his inner room so that when the outer one finally opens, it does not startle him into wildness. Joke 2, the Lala tells him, "You must learn to wait like a mosque." And the boy points out that mosques get to ring 5 times a day. Historians still argue whether we over-psychologize the caves, reading later failures back into these rooms, or under-imagine the ordinary kindness of tutors, mothers, and eunuchs who softened confinement with routine. Some point to princes who emerged with disciplined piety and competent curiosity. Others list reigns that sank under courtiers' weather. The archive, sensible as ever, gives you budgets, lesson allocations, and repairs to latticework. The rest is inference wrapped in adjectives. The mother's influence here is all preposition, with for through. With the Kisler Aga, she chooses tutors who are boring in the best way. For the boy, she builds a small vakif endowment in his name, lamps for a neighborhood mosque, bread for widows, so his first signatures feed someone besides his reflection. Through her network, she ensures the boy hears stories of just rulers that do not skip their mistakes. When she visits, she eats a bite from his tray before he does. Mothers have always been poison tasters. When she leaves, her perfume says home, not perfume. And when she prays for the day he will have to choose between speed and mercy and will remember which one feeds the city. The Kisler Aga keeps time like a captain. He regulates visits, guards against political drafts, and sometimes stands in a doorway just to absorb attention so the boy doesn't have to. He files notes. Archery straw low, geometry slate replaced, bird too noisy, moved to outer court, fever passed, rosewater helped. His power here is mostly negative space. All the crises that do not happen because routine held. Quirky tidbit number 2. Once a year, on a safe feast, a prince's caftan is sewn with an extra interior pocket for a tiny compass and a verse about direction. The tailor claims it keeps advisors from pretending to be north. Probably superstition, certainly charming, and exactly the sort of practical poetry a palace likes to hide and seems that a night falls different in the caves. Lamps burn lower, the muezzin's voice takes the edge off a day's corners, and the birds tuck their heads under wings that do not know politics. The boy closes a book with his thumb inside, because children always think they will return in 1 minute, and a eunuch who has seen 3 reigns adjusts a blanket as if it were policy. Joke 3, the Lala says, "Dream of small doors you open politely." And the boy says, "I dream of keys that know when to be quiet." By the time you back out through the lattice door, you understand why these rooms sit where they do, near enough for love to reach, far enough for factions to fail at recruiting. The caves is the palace's uneasy compromise. Keep princes alive, keep ambitions cool, keep lessons daily, and hope that when the door does widen, the man who steps through will recognize the golden road not as a corridor he survived but as a rhythm he can conduct. Outside, the corridor exhales. The fountains count your steps the way they count everyone's. The Valide's ledger breathes in the next room like a cat. You carry the caves with you, a memory of careful parentheses, and you hope, for the boy and for the city, that when the sentence continues, it still makes sense. You step into a gallery that behaves like a bookmark, thin, patient, and exactly where spectacle turns into memory. Cushions line the lattice. The air smells of lemon polish and excitement learning to whisper. Today is not a lesson day. It is a watching day, and the palace has practiced for it with the seriousness of a choir. Women settle by rank, valide near the center aperture, senior ustas at known angles, younger ones wherever the view admits their eagerness without tripping over it. Below, the city rehearses its part, the avenue combed smooth, banners testing the wind, guilds already jostling for their favorite slice of applause. Up here you are half audience, half archivist. You will watch, and by watching correctly, make the story keep its shape. The Kisler Aga has tuned the sight lines like a luthier. Screens are adjusted so faces see without being seen. Chairs creep forward or back by finger widths. A small note on a ribbon. Move 2 cushions to the left. Travels like a breeze. He posts 2 eunuchs at either end with soft shaded lanterns to tame glare if the sun turns impertinent. You have learned by now that logistics is this house's favorite art. Festivals merely give it brighter ribbons. Joke 1. The only thing louder than the Mater band down in the square is the silent intensity with which a Hazeneater USTA decides whether the third row can see the cavalry stirrups. Mainstream fact, set down with the calm of a caption under a miniature. Ottoman court festivals, especially imperial circumcision celebrations, Sunnet Digunu, and Bayram processions, unfurled as long, orchestrated pageants. The most famous, for Murad III's son Prince Mehmed in 1582, filled Istanbul for weeks. Sources speak of weeks on end, often summarized as about 50 days, and survives in the lavishly illustrated surname Ihomian, where guilds, performing machines, and gift parades march panel after panel. Harem women observed from screened galleries in the palace and along controlled vantage points, the Kisler Aga managing access so the private household could watch the public city. The day begins with Bayram greetings when the calendar says so, lamps bright at dawn, sherbets walking on trays like tidy comets, women exchanging the small phrases that make families behave. May your feast be blessed. May your ledger forgive. The sovereign proceeds to prayer. Drums and zurnas lift the morning into a reasonable height. The Ala Ihumian, imperial procession, flows, and you watch the city organize its heartbeat, janissaries like metronomes, guilds carrying their professions as banners, children chewing their way toward the memory they will tell their grandchildren. Up here, the Valai needs the edge of a cushion with 2 fingers while counting regiments under her breath, as if the army could feel steadier if it knew it was being tallied by someone with a ledger. Then the guilds take their turn, as snaffle, a parade of the city's hands. Bakers roll past with a portable oven pretending not to be nervous. Boatmen carry oars with the look of men who could, if pressed, row the horizon closer. Confectioners push a sugar mountain shaped like a mosque that glitters just shy of sacrilege and then very sensibly stops. A scribe bends over a huge sheet and writes, "Order," so beautifully that the word tidies the air as it passes. You realize the point is not only display, it is civics with candy. These are the people who keep Istanbul from falling off its own map. Historians still argue whether the durations we quote for great festivals reflect clock time or literary time, whether the 50 days of 1582 indicates continuous spectacle, or a braid of events strung across weeks with quiet hours in between. They also quarrel over how visible the harem's presence was. Did women sometimes watch from boats on the Golden Horn for certain pageants, or only from palace lattices? Miniatures show screens and galleries. Travelogues embroider. Your gallery takes the civilized middle. Women watched carefully, and the city arranged itself so they could, without turning privacy into a rumor. When the festival is a sunnet, the mood pulls tight as a drum and then relaxes like a well-behaved ribbon. Princes ride past in small armor that thinks it is a joke and actually is, pennons bobbing, quivers shining, smiles both proud and trying not to be seasick. The actual rite happens out of the crowd's reach, inside the palace, with physicians who know their craft and a midwife's authority hovering like a saint's shadow. The public part is gifts, robes of honor to officials, cash to guilds, coin showers in the courtyards where children become moral philosophers about fairness in real time. Up here, the women track who receives what with eyes trained by many stipend days. It's not gossip, it's budget analysis with confetti, quirky tidbit for your pocket. During Ramazan, the nights between Iftar and Sahur are strung with Maya lights, lamps strung between minarets spelling phrases in the sky. Welcome, month of Ramadan. Do good. Istanbul claims the craft as its own urban handwriting. Apprentices learn to stretch wire grids and hang cups of oil like letters you could drink from a distance. From the harem's upper windows the words read like note cards slipped between stars. And yes, someone always tries to guess the phrase early and is wrong half the time and delighted anyway. Some festivals belong to water. The Bosphorus becomes a blue procession route, the Sultan's barge moving like a gilt thought among thoughts. Palace kayaks skim in polite escort. From screened balconies above the salutation gate and from the women's waterside pavilions, faces turn toward the current. Because power in this city always remembers to greet the sea. You notice the cadence. You hear the mater find a tempo that doesn't bully the gulls. The Kisler Aga adjusts a curtain by an inch and in doing so prevents an entire argument 2 courtyards away. Festival days have intermissions, and the harem uses them like scholars. Women pass paper along the row, little lists of guilds spotted, notes about which fountain's inscription you could read from here, calligraphy as a long-distance sport, sketches of a new belt clasp inspired by a silversmith's float. Archives are born this way, a tray of sherbet, a reed pen, a memory written in tidy lines so that next year someone can say, "No, the bakers last year had 3 ovens on wheels, not 2. Joke 2. Official scribes write for history. The harem writes to win polite bets about how many acrobats fit on a teeterboard without scandalizing anybody's Ant.at night. The city learns to glow. Lanterns thread the divan yolu. Karaga's shadow plays wink from courtyards. Ramazan's comedians quarreling with the tenderness that survives translation. In the Helvahane, a helva sobeti, a confectionery conversation, draws scholars and courtiers into talks sweetened by sesame and sugar. The women's household keeps its own version, a reading of a festival surname, festival book, a commentary from an elder who remembers the last time a guild attempted a mechanical whale and discovered why whales should be left to God. Laughter travels lightly, as if it, too, has to pass through screens. The Friday procession, Kuma Silam Liji, is a smaller pageant that repeats like a lullaby. The Sultan goes to mosque. Units click into place. Prayers braid city and court. You watch not for novelty but for steadiness. A nervous horse today, a replaced banner tomorrow, the pace of the escort slightly faster when a rumor needs smothering. These are the details the harem notices because households are made of minute hands, not hour hands. If you must choose between a spectacular triumph and a well-timed dismount, the gallery will applaud the dismount every time. Sometimes storm interrupts choreography. Fire, plague, coup rumor. We will meet those in their own rooms, but even here, protocol has weather gear. Torches spaced as beacons, marshals who can turn processions into exits, boats stowed as plan B, a signal flag that means no speeches. The harem's vantage is not a throne, it's a monitor. Watching is a way of guarding. Historians still argue whether European festival books and miniatures over-theatricalize the guild parades. How many moving stage machines really trundled down Divan Yolu? How often fireworks outnumbered candles? Whether the mater's decibels were mercy or menace at close range. They also debate whether women's notes from galleries, rarely preserved, would alter our sense of what mattered. Your gallery answer is generous. Spectacle dressed the state. Observation kept the dress from tripping on its hem.by late afternoon. The sun takes a step back and the city, pleased with itself, agrees to exhale. Trays return with a clink that means tea and something with sesame. The Valide exchanges a few words with the Kisler Aga that sound like praise disguised as maintenance. Next time, the confectioners before the wrestlers. A junior whispers the day's count of fountains sighted, 6, and loose girths, 1, promptly fixed by a groom who deserves a small coin and a larger compliment. Joke 3, a novice, thrilled by the mater, hums the march until an aunt says gently, "Choose a softer drum for indoors." And the child invents a whispered march that somehow works. What remains when the banners are folded is the archive of eyes. Women will remember which guild marched with generosity, which petition should be easier to grant because its senders kept a tempo, which neighborhood needs lamps because its children's faces vanish too early in the dusk. Festivals, from this height, are census by other means. Tomorrow, a vacant line item might quietly shift because today a sight line taught a lesson better than any report. When you rise, the cushions recover their shape with a sigh you feel in your chest. Outside, torches begin their early arguments with dark. Inside, the gallery remembers how to be a corridor again. You have watched the empire tell itself a story and the harem proofread it, catching commas, smoothing boasts, filing away the sort of details that make charitable budgets behave. As you leave, the Kisler Aga dims a lantern by tilting its cap, and the lattice writes honeycomb on the floor. The city will sleep tonight with parade dust in its hair. The palace will sleep with lists. Between the two, the women's household has held the line of sight, not only to see, but to aim tomorrow's kindness where today's pageant said it should go. Settle your shoulders, and let the bright corners of the house dim to a kind of friendly dusk. The golden road becomes only a thin ribbon you can keep in a fingertip, and the fountains outside choose the slowest story they know, the one where nothing surprising happens and everything arrives right on time. You are still walking, yes, but the halls have widened into a gentle lane, and even the keys at your belt decide not to announce themselves. They rest in your palm like warm pebbles from a familiar shore. Breathe in the small, kind smells that never tried to be famous, linen that dried in shade, a cup rinsed twice, the last thread of clove from a purse that did its work and asked for nothing more. In this softened light, all the rooms you visited lean together, the schoolroom with lemon water rubbed across a tablet, the bath where steam taught patience, the kitchen counting spoons as if they were reasons to be gentle, the Valide's ledger closing without a sound so children can dream without arithmetic. Everywhere, the jokes have put on slippers. The piano of the saloon you began with is far away now, traded for an oud resting quietly on its side. The battlements of worry have turned into orderly shelves that agree, almost yawning, to hold the night steady. If any rumor still knocks, it finds only a cat asleep on the warm lid of the day's box of papers, and it leaves with better manners than it brought. Let your breath lengthen until paragraphs can balance on it, and then lengthen it again. The city outside the screens cools, the sea remembers how to wait, even the stars seem to prefer being counted slowly rather than admired all at once. When you are ready, place the last small light where it belongs, press your palm to the doorframe the way you've always done, and let the room return to darkness by choice, not by accident. You've learned the practice. The night will keep it for you now. Sleep.